The Resident Evil series is a very unique franchise. You've got, your stereotypical zombies, you got your spooky mansions, you got your Matrix villains, chainsaws,
Oh, cock.
a shitty movie franchise, and whatever the hell this is. Safe to say, they are not bland or unoriginal, for the most part. I've known about the series for a long time now. I remember my brother and his friend were playing Ori 5 when I was younger, and they weren't the best at it. I distinctly remember that, they would always get, killed, and I remember this one time when they got run over by a bus driven by a zombie, I think. I do remember them getting chased by a very nice chainsaw guy. That was lovely. Ignoring their lack of skill, though, I was terrified by the game. I remember I was just so scared seeing all the hordes of enemies chasing them and wanting to only murder them, their only goal being to murder them. And it just freaking added to the tension for me. Them sucking just added to the tension. This unfortunately made me too scared to ever touch one of these games, so I guess it did its job of scaring me. That was until around late 2017 when I saw Resident Evil 4 on sale. Even though I'd never played any of the games before, I knew about Resident Evil 4's popularity and reputation. Everyone always goes on about how brilliant it is, that you have to be sleeping under a rock to not know about this game's high status. But I'll get back to Resident Evil 4 later. This entire video isn't just Resident Evil 4, trust me. Even though it's literal perfection, I love it so much.
When Ori 3 Remake released back in April 2020, I was in love with the franchise, so I wanted to look back over the series and play through all the games new and old. I thought it'd be fun and educational to make a video on it, as I get to experience all the games I haven't played before, while getting a new perspective on ones I've already experienced. I'm only doing the main games and a few main spin-offs, for example Code Veronica and Revelations 1 and 2. Sorry to any fans of Outbreak or any of the other spin-offs, this isn't the video for you. Before we start, I just want to state that some of the audio was recorded at different times, so you're going to notice that my mic changes at certain points because I recorded some lines of dialogue later on. So yeah, if you notice that the mic changes, that's the reason why. And also, if you notice any audio glitches, I don't know where they came from, but they shouldn't be too annoying. But yeah, if you notice any glitches in the audio, just try to ignore any glitches you hear. This is my first time making a video like this, so any constructive criticism will be welcome, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Anyways, enough stalling. Let's start this video and enter the world of survival horror.
On July 24th, 1998, a series of bizarre murders have occurred in the Arklay Mountains, which is on the outskirts of an American town named Raccoon City. The Raccoon City Police Department's Special Tactics and Rescue Service team, also known as STARS, are assigned to investigate the murders. It consists of two teams, Alpha Team and Bravo Team. Bravo Team was sent in first a day earlier, but they went missing, so Alpha Team was sent in to find out what happened to their comrades. While searching the forest, they come across Bravo Team's crash helicopter. Well, that's at least what they say it is, because we actually never get to see it. It's like they had the budget to show it anyway. Suddenly, the group are attacked by monstrous dogs and one of the team members, Joseph, is killed. The team retreats to their helicopter, but the pilot, Brad Vickers, flies off in a panic. With little options, the team is forced to seek refuge in a nearby mansion. This is when we are introduced to the cast of the game.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, Albert Wesker, Resident Evil.
This cast intro is so cheesy that I love it. This doesn't make me feel scared, it makes me just want to pick up a gun and blast some zombie heads. The 90s cheese oddly works in its favor at setting the weird tone this game's gonna have though, so I'll give it that. Overall, the intro is passable. It doesn't really get me in the mood for survival horror, mainly due to the exaggerated acting and this. The zombie dogs do look pretty good though, so I'll give the intro that. I'd say this was more scary back when it came out though, so it did its job for back then, so it's fine. Before you play, the game gives you a choice of playing as Chris or Jill. Both characters have different attributes and story events, so you aren't playing the same game twice. Jill has a lockpick thanks to her trusty Barry. thanks to her trusty Barry, and can obtain a grenade launcher. She also has 8 inventory slots. Chris's game is significantly harder. He only has 6 inventory slots, starts with a knife, and has to find keys to unlock doors that Jill only has to use a lockpick for. He also can't get the shotgun early, unlike Jill. The only advantages that Chris has over Jill is that he can take more damage before dying, and he can get healed by his teammate whenever he wants. Whichever character you pick, the other one disappears at the start of the story and doesn't appear until the end of the game. Instead, the player is teamed up with another character. Jill gets Barry and Chris gets Rebecca. Rebecca is one of the members of Bravo Team who found her way into the mansion following her disappearance the day before. Now that the game gives you control, you are free to explore the mansion and the surrounding area to figure out what happened here and find any surviving members of your team. Let's start with gameplay. The game is semi-open world as you're allowed to explore the entire mansion, with the proper items of course. One of the main features of the game is exploration. You see, you have to find items to solve puzzles, unlock doors, and find weapons and ammunition to take on the undead. Combat in the game is very simple, it's just point in the general direction of an enemy and shoot. It's only ever really intense when you're low on ammo or health, or the camera shifts to a different perspective when you can't see an enemy. Yeah, as you can tell, the game isn't a traditional third-person game. There's fixed camera angles which allow for detailed pre-rendered backgrounds, which helped with the PS1's limited technology at the time. The environments don't look that amazing, but a few locations stand out. It's fine for the time. The fixed camera angles actually help in the horror department, as it can make you paranoid about what's around every corner, and it helps give the game an identity, especially for back then during the 5th generation of video game consoles. But in all honesty, the game isn't really that scary now. But it is unfair to call out the game on that, as the devs did try their best with what they had at the time, and they definitely succeeded back then, as I've heard many people say that the game scared the shit out of them as a kid. The only scary moment for me personally was the first zombie encounter. In the game, you walk around a corner and you see it just eating a corpse, and it just stops, and it slowly turns around to look at you, its next meal. The graphics and its eyes are what get me on edge. It's such a well done moment. The fact that I think it has no eyelid, it just looks back at you with just no emotion, just one objective, just to eat you. That just scares the shit out of me. The enemies themselves though aren't that scary. There's a nice variety, don't get me wrong. There's zombies, dogs, sharks, hunters, and a few others I won't spoil just in case someone wants to play a 24-year-old game. Good luck. The enemies feel more like roadblocks than genuine threats. I only feel intimidated by them if, as I've stated before, if I'm low on ammo or health or I haven't saved in a while. The game doesn't autosave. You have to save with an item called ink ribbons, which you use at typewriters to save. It's a genius idea for the developers to have saving being limited. A brilliant way to add suspense. Like, should you save now or should you carry on and risk losing hours of progress if you unfortunately die? Brilliant stuff all around here. Puzzles range from easy to sort of difficult. Some puzzles can be solved in the room you find yourself in, while others require you to search for key items to solve them. The only issue with puzzles for me personally was when you discover one that requires an item that you don't have on you, but you have in your item box, so you run halfway across the mansion to get it and run back. That's not necessarily the puzzle's fault, it's just something I found annoying. The game has save rooms, which are safe areas where you can save, and they also have an item box, which I've said previously. These boxes allow you to store items you don't need at the moment, or take items you need now. Every item box is connected, so you'll always have the same items in each box, so you don't have to worry about items going missing or anything like that. When it comes to atmosphere and sound, it's a bit of a mixed bag in my opinion. There isn't much ambience besides the sound of footsteps or the groans of enemies. The soundtrack wasn't much of a standout for me either. There were a few good tracks, like the save room theme, the caves, and the music that plays during certain enemy encounters. None of the music is bad by any means, just not that memorable. Overall, I did like this game. I had some issues, but I enjoyed from what I saw. It's weird because I heard this game was known for something infamous, like, I don't know, maybe it's... Oh no.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
What is this all about? I can't figure it out at all.
Here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you. That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich. Don't scare me.
That's what I was going to say.
But just take a look at this. It's Forrest. Oh my God.
It's awful.
I'm going to find out what caused Forrest's death. It looks like he was killed by a crow or something. Whoa. This hall is dangerous. There must be a back door somewhere. Let's try to find it first, shall we? Just a moment. I found something.
What is it?
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
Hey, what is this?
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
You're wounded. What kind of demon attacked you?
It was a huge snake, and also poisonous. Ugh.
I told you, don't worry. I'll just go and get some fresh air and be eaten by a monster.
Tyrant. Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
You saved me.
Yeah,
That was close. Thanks, Barry.
don't mention it. What a monster. I can't believe. What the hell is this place anyway?
That's what I was going to say. Can't see very well.
How about going down to check by yourself? I have a rope here.
Oh, do you? Well, then I'll try to go down using the rope.
Jill, you're here too.
Yes, this game is widely known for its horrendous voice acting. Just listen to this. No one talks like this. Are the characters high on something? They always act strange, even in the most basic of interactions. It does not help when you're looking at very basic looking character models that can't emote more than my Lego figures. The acting is so bad that it honestly adds to the enjoyment in a weird, so bad it's good kind of way. Resident Evil 1 was a solid first game to start off the series. It's got nice exploration, puzzles, unique features, and simple combat. My only issues are the enemies don't really scare me, soundtrack and ambience could be better. Some features are a bit dated, for example how your character moves, and the voice acting is definitely not boring to say the least. You can take my last point as a positive or negative, I don't really care. The game is good, but it's not brilliant, so I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Resident Evil 1 was a huge success for the developers at Capcom. It received generally positive reviews from critics and fans, and it sold nearly 3 million units, not including re-releases. It was obvious to Capcom that fans wanted a sequel, so they obliged. 2 years after the original, Capcom released Resident Evil 2. During the events of the first game, STAR's Alpha team discovered the T-Virus, a biological weapon developed by the Umbrella Corporation, which is what turns people into zombies. On September 29, 1998, 2 months after the events of the first game, the virus is now spread to the nearby town of Raccoon City. The game then shows us our new protagonist, Claire Redfield, sister to the protagonist of the first game, Chris Redfield. She's going to Raccoon City to find her missing brother, as she hasn't heard from him in some time. When she arrives in town, she's unfortunately greeted with a few zombies, but is rescued by our other protagonist, a cop named Leon S. Kennedy, aka my favourite character. The duo commandeer a police car and attempt to seek refuge in the Raccoon City Police Department, or RPD for short. They are, however, attacked by a zombie and crash. Before long, a truck crashes into them, forcing the duo to split up. Now they must find the RPD and escape this terrible nightmare. Right off the bat, this intro feels so much better than Resident Evil 1's intro. It actually feels tense to me, and it blends well what the game actually looks like in gameplay instead of filming in live action. The voice acting here is so much better than Resident Evil 1 as well. It's still not 100% fine, but I feel like I can actually connect with these people, not just laugh at them. I also really like the voice actors for Leon and Claire. So far, it started off very well. Resident Evil 2 gives you the same options as Resident Evil 1 before starting a game. You can choose between two characters. In this case, it's Leon or Claire. Both characters play the same, not like the previous game when Jill had a lockpick and more inventory slots than Chris. Instead, each character has different weapons, puzzles, and scenarios. Each character also has a companion like the previous game. Claire gets Sherry Birkin, a little girl whose parents work for the Umbrella Corporation and are related to the incident, in Raccoon City. Leon gets Ada Wong, a mysterious woman who claims to be looking for her boyfriend John, an Umbrella researcher. Both companions help differentiate each character to give them a distinct campaign. I'm just going to say this up front. This is an amazing sequel. From what I've seen, it improves upon everything the original did and then some. The first major positive for me was the soundtrack. Like, holy crap, it's good. There's a reason why it's one of my favourite soundtracks, and it's moments like this when you first enter the RPD. It just oozes with atmosphere and I definitely feel on edge. The soundtrack is extremely memorable and it adds to the horror. Enemies in this game have vastly improved. Encounters with them actually feel really intense now. Zombies feel much more scary now, and the devs created new enemies like the Licker. This enemy is so unique and terrifying that moments with them are nail-biting. Environments have improved as well. They look more detailed, and it's honestly one of the best PlayStation 1 games I've seen. They are way more memorable, and I love the urban environments that we get to explore in the city and the RPD. Environments feel more varied as well, mainly because you aren't stuck in one place. You get to explore different areas of the city. The cast in Ori 2 is solid, with the standouts being the main leads and Ada for me. The actors really bring a lot to the characters that on paper don't have much to them. Story is passable though. Better than Ori 1's, but not phenomenal, but I don't think Capcom are going for the Oscar here. I enjoyed the character interactions more than the story. Seeing Claire become a motherly figure for Sherry was actually really cute and charming, and it made it easy to root for her. Leon and Ada have a nice little romantic subplot to spice up the story, which works well. And I love how people just completely ignore some of the things Leon says. It's just hilarious to me.
It'll be all right, trust me. We found a way to the sewer. Follow us later.
Claire! Claire! Wait! Man, why doesn't anyone ever listen to me?
Gameplay is very similar to the first game. You still got the fixed camera angles, limited inventory, and you have to solve puzzles, you know the drill. I can't believe I forgot to mention this in the Resident Evil 1 segment, but you move with tank controls in this game, which means that pressing up on the controller means that the character moves in the direction they face, down reverses, and then left and right rotates them. It looked clunky in the original, but it's better here. One more thing I forgot to mention in the previous segment is door opening animations. They were good in the first game, but it's much improved here because of what the game excels at, better enemies and soundtrack. You feel nervous because the music keeps you on edge and you wonder what's behind each door, and it's always nothing because it's a loading screen. When this happened, I got spooked. The biggest difference between Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 is the zapping system. As I've stated before, each character gets different playthroughs, but whichever character you play as first directly affects the other one. These are called scenarios, and there's 4 of them in total. There's Claire A, Leon B, or Leon A, and Claire B. Whichever character you choose first will result in different gameplay sections, item placement, and story moments like fates of different characters and small little details like how the car crashes in the beginning. Depends on who you play as first. It's important which side of the car your first character is at because they need to get the RPG first before the other one. Mechanics like this really add replay value to the game, and I really appreciate that. The game also has bonus modes named the Fourth Survivor and the Tofu Survivor, which are all about fighting through a gauntlet of enemies in the fastest time possible and escaping from Raccoon City. I don't have much gripes with this game. Combat still feels simple and bosses are very straightforward. They do look cool, and one has a Terminator vibe to it because it always comes back after you kill it. You know, kill it, quote unquote. But all in all, this is a kick-ass sequel, and I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. Resident Evil 2 received critical praise by both fans and critics. Capcom wanted to make more Resident Evil games as soon as possible to capitalize on 2's success. Capcom were now making 2 Resident Evil games at the time, but they decided to release number 3 before the start of the new millennia. So let's dive back into Raccoon City one more time. On September 28, 1998, 24 hours prior to the events of Resident Evil 2, former STARS member Jill Valentine, one of the protagonists of the first game, attempts to escape from Raccoon City. As we know from Resident Evil 2, the town is infested with zombies, which halts her progress. Throughout her escape, she meets characters like Brad Vickers, the pilot from the first game, Carlos, a member of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, or UBCS for short, and his 2 comrades, Nikolai and Mikhail. The intro is similar in quality to Resident Evil 2's intro. It sets out the tone and atmosphere well, but it feels a bit low budget at the start as it just shows still images of Jill instead of fully animated cutscenes like the rest of the intro. I like how the intro shows the chaos of the zombie outbreak happening in the city. It foreshadows how the game would be more action orientated than previous games instead of horror, a trend that's definitely followed in future entries. This game doesn't give you a choice between 2 characters. You only play as Jill, but you do play a small section as Carlos, who kind of plays the role of Jill's companion like Barry was in the first game. Jill plays the same as Claire and Leon in Ori 2. The only difference is that she has a crafting tool to allow her to craft different types of ammo. This is a neat feature and it comes in handy. The only downside is that you have to have it in your inventory when you want to use it, which obviously takes up inventory space. This is never good, as we're in a series where full inventories are as common as the common cold. Story is okay, it's as simple as Resident Evil 1 and 2's, but it's not horrible as it's a cool escape story and it does a lot in the gameplay to make the escape as memorable as possible. Characters in this game are solid. Jill is way better here than she was in Resident Evil 1 and can actually hold a conversation with someone that doesn't end with me laughing my ass off.
I was looking for you.
Barry.
Carlos is a cool sidekick, but he did not have much character besides for being a flirtatious ladies man and just the good guy, if that makes sense. He was fine for the story.
Nikolai serves as a nice foil for Jill, as he really is the first main human villain we've gotten in the series thus far. Wesker was the main human villain of Ori 1, but he was a surprise villain, so we didn't get much time to see him as the villain. He only appeared at the end. Annette is kind of a villain in Ori 2, but she only has a few scenes, so I didn't really count her as much of a threat. And Irons is a good threat for what scenes he has, but I don't know, he wasn't there for that much of the game to be that much of a threat. Nikolai doesn't even get turned into a monster like previous evil characters. He's just a man doing a job and he's really good at it.
Gameplay is the same as before once again. You know the pattern by this point.
Puzzles are pretty good in this game. I think they're around the same quality as Ori 2, and I think they're definitely better than Ori 1. They are more trial and error based for the most part. Like, you still have the traditional ones with, like finding items and putting them in the right places and all that. But there's definitely a few where you just kind of do trial and error and keep just figuring out until keep failing until you get it right. But I don't know, I think they're pretty good now. I enjoyed them for the most part.
Combat is slightly different now, as it takes a more action approach. More enemies appear on screen than before, and you can tell that the game wants you to use your weapons instead of saving your ammo like before. A nice change of pace compared to the previous games in my opinion.
A new mechanic for combat was the dodge move. When I first saw this, I thought it would just be an obscure mechanic that would be never used ever, but I actually found myself using it a good bit, especially during boss encounters. It's not mandatory for a playthrough, but it's definitely handy to master.
Everything seems fine in the game, as you pretty much experienced all these zombies and such before, like in Ori 2. That's until this guy shows up.
Jill!
Brad!
We've gotta... Jill! Help!
Yeah, this is a tyrant named Nemesis that just killed your friend Brad, and its only mission now is to kill you, the last member of STARS in Raccoon City. This thing changes up the entire gameplay loop of the game. Instead of taking your time exploring areas, you're now rushing through, hoping to God the main villain Nemesis does not catch you. Nemesis can chase you through many parts of the map, and he packs a punch. Safe to say, bring some health items and some ammo if you think about taking on this horrible creation. During your first encounter with Nemesis, the game introduces this new choice-based mechanic, where you can now choose between two different options that result in different outcomes. Some choices are minor, while others have major consequences which can determine the fates of certain characters and affect the ending. Pretty cool stuff. This mechanic helps add replay value to a game where you only play as one character instead of two.
Environments look detailed for the time, and I like how we get more time in the Raccoon City street instead of just most in the RPG in the second game. You go to a lot of different locations in this game. You don't explore a lot of these areas as deeply as you would in Ori 1 or Ori 2 in the mansion or the RPD, besides for maybe the Raccoon City streets, but you explore them enough that they leave a big enough impact on you. I'm honestly fine with this because the game has definitely a more linear structure than the first and second game, so yeah, I'm okay with it.
The game also has a mode called Mercenaries, which is similar to the fourth survivor from Ori 2, as you have to fight through a gauntlet of enemies to reach a designated spot while trying to attain a high score. You can choose between Carlos, Nikolai, and Mikhail, and they all have different weapons to slightly change up the gameplay here. I don't have much else to say here really. Most of the great things here were in RE2, and the new things are a great addition, especially Nemesis. Negatives are the same as Resident Evil 2, besides for boss fights, they're much improved.
This game does lack some of the horror atmosphere compared to 2, but it has very fun gameplay. It's better than Ori 1, but I think it's slightly worse than Ori 2. So I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10.
know how I mentioned how Capcom are making 2 games after Resident Evil 2? Well, Resident Evil Code Veronica was the second game they were making alongside Resident Evil 3. It was released in February 2000 on Sega's console, the Dreamcast. This was the first time a Resident Evil game debuted on another console. It seemed that Capcom wanted to expand their audience for the next generation of consoles. Code Veronica tries to be bigger than Resident Evil 3 and expand the storyline of the universe compared to 3's smaller scale story. Will it pay off? Well, let's find out. In December 1998, 3 months after escaping from Raccoon City, Claire Redfield raids an Umbrella Corporation facility in Paris, still in search of her brother Chris Redfield. She is unfortunately catched by security and taken to Rockford Island, a prison owned by the corporation. Sometime after her imprisonment, Claire finds herself released by one of the prison staff and discovers that an outbreak of the T-virus has occurred. During her escape, she comes across characters such as Steve Burnside, a fellow inmate in the prison, Alexia and Alfred Ashford, the main protagonists of the game, and a surprise appearance of Chris and Wesker. Well, not really Chris or Wesker because they literally are on the title screen, so oops there on Capcom's part. Code Veronica plays very similar to the previous games. Gameplay is pretty much the same. That's not a bad thing here though, as the game does have good things going for it that complements the gameplay. The biggest difference between this and the previous entries is the updated graphics and visuals. This game looks really good for the time, and I know I've said that before, but like the environments are now in real time instead of pre-rendered backgrounds. This now allows for a dynamic camera movement instead of the camera cutting to different angles when the character leaves the screen. This is a welcome addition, and I think it helps navigating environments easier, and enemy encounters are more engaging because of it. Enemies are solid enough. It's mostly just zombies, but we do get zombie dogs back, and we get new things like this giant worm thing, and these gooey enemies that were surprisingly intimidating. Some enemies are extremely annoying though, like the frickin' bats. Oh my god, they were so annoying. They don't even do that much damage, but they consistently get in the way of you, and they always come in crowds, so expect a good lot of health taken off you. Similar to Resident Evil 2 and 3, environments here are varied and detailed. There's a lot of environmental storytelling, and I appreciate that. Some areas aren't as memorable as others, like this base in Antarctica. It had cool spots, but it didn't really interest me. The soundtrack was fine. Some tracks kind of fade into the background for me, while others really stuck out, my favourite being the save room theme. After you're done this video, just listen to all the save room themes in Resident Evil. You'll enjoy them immensely. Story is honestly, like, good now. Like, not perfect, but it's better than the last few games. It's good. Expands upon the Umbrella Corporation by showing us what it was like to work there. We get these through notes and characters, mainly our 2 villains, the Ashford twins. They were a part of a highly respected rich family who worked for Umbrella. Their dynamic was interesting, and I particularly liked Alfred because of his very odd demeanour and his interesting ways of talking to his sister. Yeah, very interesting. Alexia is way more cold and not as charismatic or intimidating. Albert Wesker shows up as a third villain that is working behind the scenes to take down the twins, as they are gone rogue from the company and are a threat to his plans. Wesker doesn't do much as he only appears in a few brief cutscenes, but he's fine as is. I really liked Claire in this game. She's way more tough and confident in this game and is pretty badass. She doesn't have a kid around to protect, so now she can go full John Woo on our asses. Steve is fine, he's just there to be Claire's sidekick and be a potential love interest. Capcom tries to give him depth, but it didn't do much for me. Also, his voice can be kind of annoying sometimes.
You gotta be kidding. I found it and I'm keeping it.
He's also a bit creepy as well. There's sometimes where like he tries to do things when Claire is like not aware, and it's like, okay man, calm down, chill. Chris finally returns, and he's improved a lot since Resident Evil 1. His simple quest of rescuing Claire is really nice, as we never got to see these two interact before. Bosses are a mixed bag, some I hate and some I enjoy. Mainly this one, the Snow, as this guy has a really cool design and a backstory and a cool gimmick for the fight. My biggest gripes though are the pacing. It's all over the place. At the start of the game you play as Claire, but about halfway through you switch to Chris, who has to follow in Claire's footsteps to find her. They do try to spice up things in these areas by changing the layout of them and having different puzzles and enemies to deal with, but it still made the game feel slow at times. You do switch between the two a few times, but it's really inconsistent and it doesn't save the pacing. Also, Chris and Claire barely interact when they finally meet up. You get like 2 cutscenes together and that's it. It's annoying because I really like their chemistry and it's a shame we didn't get more of it. This is the only time they're together too in the entire series, so that just makes it even more sad. I honestly wish we got a Chris and Claire game, you know, them teaming up instead of having Claire be stuck with Steve. Wesker does get a cool confrontation with Chris, as he was the one who foiled his plans in Resident Evil 1, so it was expected that these two rivals would have a confrontation sometime down the line. The only problem is that it's all in a cutscene, and there's not even a boss fight. Like, what a missed opportunity! We have Wesker here, hamming it up.
Sure, I'm not human anymore, but just look at the power I've gained.
And we don't even get to personally take him down. It's really annoying.
I just wanted to mention this here before I forget, but after you complete the main game, you get this thing called the battle game. I just call it battle mode. It's basically Code Veronica's version of Mercenaries. You play as Claire, Chris and Steve, as you fight through a gauntlet of enemies, and then you have to beat the final boss. You have to try and do all of this in the fastest time possible as well to get a high score. High scores reward you with stuff like additional costumes. I actually think this mode adds a bit to the experience at the end of the day.
Code Veronica is a weird game to critique. It does some things very well, but it also has some low points that downgrade the score a bit. I respect Capcom for trying to update the formula and try new things, but they're a bit over their heads when making this. With some tweaks here and there, we would have had a game up there with the likes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. It's still a solid game, but one I probably won't come back to for a while.
I'm going to give this game a 6.5 out of 10.
Regardless of the negatives I have with Code Veronica, it was received well and it sold over 1 million copies worldwide. It did do as well as previous games, but it didn't stop Capcom from making more. Their next game wasn't a new numbered entry, but actually a remake of the original Resident Evil 1 on PS1. The director of the original game, Shinji Mikami, thought that the game didn't age that well, so he wanted to update it to better hardware to produce a game that was far closer to his original vision. So in 2002, we got Resident Evil. The game's main story is the exact same as before. Star's Alpha team are searching for Bravo team in the Arklay Mountains and are attacked by zombie dogs and have to seek refuge in a mansion. You know the story. We play the same characters too, with the same attributes as before. Characters are thankfully updated and aren't as laughably weird in conversations. Jill, Barry and Rebecca get the biggest improvements here, while Wesker looks even more like a bad guy. Chris is good too, but we already got development with him in Code Veronica, so he didn't need that much improvement here. Graphics in this game are phenomenal. Capcom returned to the pre-rendered backgrounds here and they took full advantage of their new tech. The footage you're watching here is from the modern re-release, but even back then it looked great. It really gives off that scary feeling that the original lacked for me. Ambient sounds helped this too, as I was on the edge of my seat creeping around corners, only hearing the creak of floorboards and the wind blowing trees against the windows. Excellent stuff. The biggest positive this game has is that it switches up things from the original and adds new things to confuse old players. It just adds more for newcomers to the series. First thing to mention is new areas added to the mansion to explore in the surrounding areas. This gives more options to roam around and explore. They feel like natural additions to the area instead of just being hastily placed there for the sake of padding out the game. Puzzles are tweaked and or changed. I really like this as I found the new puzzles fun and interesting to solve. One of the biggest changes in the game though is a new enemy type. Okay, let's just put this into a scenario. You are roaming the halls, trying to find a puzzle item, when out of nowhere you encounter a zombie. You decide to take it down out of instinct and the threat is now eliminated. Or is it? The body is still there and it hasn't disappeared like previous games. You play for another hour and you see the zombie again and it's still not moving. But when you least expect it, bam, it's up and it's ready to rip your head off. These are the Crimson Heads, resurrected zombies that are faster and stronger than before. These horrible creatures change up your entire playstyle, as now you fear taking down just normal zombies and you almost want to just avoid them most of the time. It's a genius move. The only way to prevent a resurrection is by blowing off their heads, which is hard to pull off and inconsistent, or by burning the corpse. However, burning the corpse can only be done a handful of times. I love these enemies as they fit perfectly into the game, and they never appear again in the series, so it gives this game more of an identity. The next biggest change is the introduction of Lisa Trevor. She is a monster that wasn't in the original game, but she comes in full swing here. She is an invincible enemy that walks around the mansion. Her design is creepy as hell, but it's her tragic backstory that really makes her great, as it really adds to the game's world. You don't even have to learn about a backstory if you want to, you can completely ignore it, like her entire backstory and what happened to her is completely optional, which is really cool. I won't dare spoil for anyone interested in playing this game, it needs to be experienced. This review of RE1 Remake has been very short, hasn't it? I have very little negatives besides for bosses still being simple and the same with combat. Ignoring that, this is a beautiful remake that needs to be experienced by anyone interested in the horror genre. If you had to choose between this game and the original, go with the remake, it's so much better. Capcom really hit it out of the park with this one. This is definitely one of the greats, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Capcom were acting similar to how they were when they were making Resident Evil 3 and Code Veronica, as in 2002 they were making 2 Resident Evil games, one being the Resident Evil 1 remake and the other being a prequel to the first game, Resident Evil 0. This game is very polarizing for me because it does things that are very ambitious but also harm the experience for me. Let's just get right into it. On July 23rd, 1998, a train owned by the pharmaceutical company Umbrella comes under attack by a swarm of leeches. As the passengers and crew are attacked, a mysterious young man watches over the resulting chaos from a hillside. 2 hours later, the Bravo team of the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, STARS, are sent to investigate a series of cannibalistic murders in the Arklay Mountains outside of Raccoon City. On the way to the scene, Bravo team's helicopter has an engine failure and crash lands in the forest. While a search of the immediate area, Officer Rebecca Chambers of Bravo team comes across a train. She explores it only to find the passengers and crew transformed into zombies. As she explores the train for answers, she teams up with Billy Cohen, a convict who was being transferred to a prison when the car he was in was attacked, giving him the opportunity to escape. The both of them now to work together to survive this nightmare. I have a lot to say about this game. I'm going to start with positives though before I get into the negatives. This game looks stunning. It's possibly better looking than Resident Evil 1 Remake, and that's a high bar. Capcom really outdid themselves here when creating these pre-rendered backgrounds. Soundtrack is nice, the best track obviously being the Save Room theme. Nothing much else to say here. I think the story is fine. I like when the game shows us backstory for Umbrella. We get to see things like how they train recruits and we get info on what they were doing the night before the events of Resident Evil 1. The villain is very forgettable unfortunately. He's just a man with leech powers and can sing very well to control them. A bit ridiculous for Resident Evil standards. He does have a somewhat interesting backstory that relates to Umbrella, but it didn't do much for me. Rebecca was really good though. She's cute, but she can hold her own. I like seeing her develop from scared and reckless to a confident badass that's a force to be reckoned with. The only problem with her development is how she acts in Resident Evil 1. You see, Ori 1 only takes place a day after this, but for some reason in that game, Rebecca is suddenly helpless again. But he was a pretty likable companion. He doesn't get much development besides for opening up about his past, but that's about it. Him and Rebecca have a pretty good dynamic though. I like the environments we explore throughout the game. They are just filled with a spooky atmosphere that suits the tone of the game. Only issue here is that I can feel a bit too similar to Ori 1's environments. I'm guessing this is because both games were made alongside each other, so ideas might have overlapped. Now the game's biggest feature is the co-op system. It's not a two-player game and you're not forced to play with a second person in the room. You actually control both characters at the same time in the game. You can switch between them anytime besides for specific events. Each character has different attributes to make them different. Billy can push heavy objects and take more damage. Rebecca is weaker, but she knows how to make health items, unlike Billy. Now this feature is neat in concept, and at first it's cool. But after a while it gets really annoying when you have to manage both characters' inventories and their health while taking on enemies. To make matters worse, there's no item box. All the items in the game are either in your inventory or on the floor. In previous games you couldn't drop anything. It was either discard the item or put it away in your item box. It's really annoying having to drop something, then running back for it later for one thing, then dropping it again. I understand what they're going for, but it just falls flat in my opinion. I didn't really like the enemies in this game either. Zombies are fine and the Tyrant is a cool boss fight, but every other enemy is forgettable, annoying, or broken. Those frickin' monkeys are the worst thing ever created by man. The game feels unfair at times. I played the game on hard, so I expected a challenge, but certain enemies, the monkeys again, those goddamn monkeys, they are impossible to hit and they can stun lock you, resulting in an unfair game over. And sometimes the characters get separated from each other, so you better make sure you gave the right character the important items beforehand because you're screwed if you get separated and you don't have any good items for boss fights. You can potentially soft lock your game if you don't have enough ammunition for boss fights, so you either have to restart the entire game, or if you're lucky, you save a few times back and you can go back to that point. For example, the Bat boss fight. Jesus Christ, this is the worst boss fight in Resident Evil I ever played. First of all, if you want to enter this boss fight, you have to have one of your teammates stand outside, so you can't team up on the feckin' thing. And secondly, it flies up in the air around you, so it's hard to hit because of the fixed camera angles. It's not first person, Thirdly, it's got many bats with it, which dwindles on your health small bits, but they keep spam locking you. And finally, if you don't have enough ammo, or if you don't have ammo for the grenade launcher or the shotgun, you are f***ed. And when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, that's very hard to come by. This is the worst boss fight in the Resident Evil series, in my opinion, and I never want to fight this thing again. Fuck this boss fight. Oh, Jesus Christ, this game. I also thought that the game was a bit too long as well. I feel like there's a section or two that could have been shortened, because when I was near the end of the game, I just wanted to get it over with. That's never a good sign.
There's 2 additional side modes that are in the game after you beat it. There's a Wesker mode. It's kind of weird. It's basically Wesker replaces Billy, but like it's the same. It's just a skin because Billy's lines are still there. The cutscenes are the exact same. Just Wesker's there. They add a few lines for Wesker, but like it's just Billy. Wesker does have 2 unique abilities though. One is like this like charge up shockwave move that he charges it up and it like blows up the enemies. It's alright, it's pretty useful I guess. And then there's the other one that's like a dash move, and it seems pretty useless to me in a game like this. Like maybe I don't know, might be good for speedrunning, but I don't see much point in the gameplay. It's just the same thing again. It's just a campaign, but with Wesker. So yeah, I don't really see much point. It's cool, I guess, but I know I wouldn't put much time into it. The other mode is the Leech Hunter mode. It's basically you go around like the mansion as Billy and Rebecca. You have to collect leeches of different colors. One color is for Rebecca, one color is for Billy, and you have to try and get them in a certain amount of time and try to get high scores. And the high scores unlock rewards and stuff. I didn't put much time into this either because I was really done with this game and I just do not want to play more of it. Like I guess it could be cool. Like it'd be nice to unlock some guns for the main campaign if you actually do like this game. Which fair enough, if you like it, more power to you, but it's not for me.
All in all, Resident Evil 0 tries to be ambitious, which I respect, but just fails spectacularly at what it's trying to achieve. It's still an alright game that I'm sure many people enjoy more than me, but I just did not have a great time. I'm really upset by this because this was the last traditional Resident Evil game. We never got fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds again. I'm not saying I don't like how the newer games were portrayed, I just wish we got a better send-off for this era of Resident Evil. I was actually going to originally give this game a 6 out of 10 because I thought it was like, it's still above average, it's good, but Resident Evil 0 gets a 5 out of 10. Even though Resident Evil 1 Remake was received very well by critics and fans, and Resident Evil 0 just kind of existed, unfortunately they both had low sales. Capcom were in a tight spot and were unsure of how to continue the series. Should they keep going with what they're doing, or should they try something new? Well, for the next mainline entry in the series, Capcom went through a lot of development issues to give us what we have today. Resident Evil 4 probably has the most famous development history of the lot, as Capcom created 4 different versions of the game. One of those versions actually became Devil May Cry of all things, another popular franchise by Capcom. One of the other versions was nicknamed the Hookman Demo. This was looking to be more horror focused. It had a dynamic camera like Code Veronica, but it also placed the camera behind the character's back, and you had a laser sight for your weapon. These latter 2 features would actually carry over to the final release. All these versions never saw the light of day though, and Capcom were running out of options. Resident Evil 1 director Shinji Mikami took over development of the game and decided that the series needed a reinvention because he felt that the games were getting repetitive by this point. Finally, in 2005, we got Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 starts off with narration by a Resident Evil 2 protagonist, Leon S. Kennedy, who recaps the events of the previous games and brings us up to speed. I like this as it doesn't alienate newcomers to the series. Anyways, it's now 2004, 6 years since the Raccoon City incident. Leon is now an agent working for the US government and he is tasked with rescuing the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, who has been kidnapped by a mysterious cult in a rural part of Spain. Once you start playing, you immediately notice that this game is different. It's in third person now. No fixed camera. What's going on here? Once you get over this shocking revelation, you advance towards a house to question anyone on Ashley's whereabouts. You are then greeted with a friendly villager.
I was wondering if you might recognize a girl in this photograph?
¿Qué carajo estás haciendo aquí?
Lárgate, cabrón!
Sorry to have bothered you.
Freeze! I said freeze!
Now you are forced to take him down, and what a shocker, you have to aim while shooting. This is incredible. This is insane. This is outrageous. We're supposed to aim at our Resident Evil games now? A hardcore fan back in the day was probably in shock when playing this. Moving on now, we come across a village with a corpse impaled on a fire. Jesus Christ. These villagers should be nice, right?
¡Por allí! ¡No dejes que se escape! ¡Agárralo! Vayan por detrás.
Who are these people?
¡Bloqueale el paso!
What are they planning? Chainsaw.
Now you are surrounded by these crazy villagers and you are forced to seek refuge in a house. This segment is insane. Up to this point you've been trying to get used to the controls and gameplay and you've only encountered a handful of enemies. But now you are tossed into this nightmare and are told to deal with it. This whole bit is genius. It forces the player into a difficult position and you have to adapt on the fly. Or suffer yeah, that will happen. After a few minutes of desperately fighting, you are saved by a bell ringing and the villagers start walking towards a church.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Boom. Mic dropped. Well done, Capcom. Well done. This whole opening section is perfect. It sets the tone and atmosphere of the game perfectly. You're going to have very intense moments and satisfying combat with a bit of wit and campy humor. I was immediately hooked by this intro. But was I a bit naive in thinking this game would be good? Hell no! This game is perfect! Combat is perfect! Enemies are fun to fight against! Weapons are fun and exciting to use! Characters are great! Bosses are great! Oh my god! The review's over 10 out of 10! Just kidding. I wouldn't just leave it at that. Let's start with the gameplay. As I stated before, you now have to aim by yourself. You are now in control of the action. I said before that in previous games gunplay and combat was very basic, while here it's the complete opposite. Every weapon is different. You have pistols, shotguns, machine guns, grenades, RPG, snipers, the list goes on. Every gun is fun to use, which incentivizes different playstyles with each playthrough of the game. Each gun can be upgraded because of a new character, the Merchant.
Got something that might interest you.
This guy allows you to buy and upgrade weapons with money you find in the environment, or by killing enemies. Yeah, you can get items from enemies now. You never could before in previous games, but it's a welcome addition here, as it complements the fast-paced nature that RE4 is going for. You also can find treasure to sell to this guy too. The Merchant is so charismatic, which makes every visit to him extremely enjoyable.
Welcome! Got a selection of good things on sale, stranger. Got some rare things on sale, stranger. What are you buying? What are you selling? Ah, I'll buy it at a high price. Thank you. Stranger, stranger. Now that's a weapon. Come back any time.
This arsenal of weapons makes combat a blast, but Capcom made sure to up the ante when fighting. Enemies usually come in swarms and are weirdly smart. Well, they're not geniuses, but they can surround you, place traps, throw weapons or explosives. Crazy infected villagers aren't the only enemies though. We got dogs, chainsaw guys, these things, zombified knights, and these things called novistadors, these blind guys with really good hearing, and much more. Combat just never gets old, surprisingly. Capcom just keeps adding different scenarios and set pieces to keep everything fresh. For example, there's a section where you have a choice to go down two different paths. One is filled with enemies and chainsaw ladies, while the other has an El Thick Boy, aka an El Gigante. The constant switching up really keeps you on your toes, as you don't know what to expect. The environments are quite varied, like previous games. But here we got villages, mines, military islands, labs, castles. Wait, a castle? Yeah, you probably didn't expect that from a Resident Evil game now, did you? They all feel distinct, and I never sighed once when going to a new part of the game. The graphics are good, but the color scheme sometimes looks a bit muddy. That was kind of a trend back then to be more gritty and realistic. This doesn't ruin the game's overall look, as we do get some nice looking areas most of the time. As you can probably tell from my short synopsis of the plot earlier, the story is very basic, and in all honesty, a bit stupid. Like, why would the president send only one guy to rescue his daughter? Leon must be getting paid the big bucks if the commander-in-chief trusts him enough to take out an entire cult by himself. The story doesn't really take itself that seriously, which helps you accept its simplicity. I'm more interested in the characters here than the story. Same as usual, I guess. Leon has grown immensely since Resident Evil 2. He's no longer the naive Boy Scout. Now he's confident, he spews out one-liners, and he's coming for that booty. He's really fun to watch, and I love watching him foil the villain's plans. He gives you that, you gotta do better than that kind of vibe, if you know what I mean. The person he's trying to save, Ashley, is very simple in one note. There's not much to her besides for her being the damsel in distress, but she has a few good moments in cutscenes.
Looks like this is it.
Ugh, it stinks.
Sure does.
No way, Leon.
Way.
Are you out of your mind?
I knew you'd be fine if you landed on your butt.
You...
I don't hate her, which is good because you have to escort her in gameplay. Now, from what I've seen, the majority of the community loves to give crap to these portions of gameplay, because it's true that most escort missions in games are crap. But it's different here. Ashley's AI is very basic and simple. She follows you everywhere you go. You can order her to stop, or follow you, or hide if the option presents itself, which is very handy in combat, trust me. The only problem is that she can sometimes get in the way while shooting, or if she gets kidnapped and taken on the map, it's an instant game over, which can be really annoying sometimes, especially when playing on the hardest difficulty. Sake, Ashley. The other annoying thing is...
Leon! 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 Help me, Leon! Help! Help me, Leon! Help! Help! Leon! Leon!
Ashley screams. For Christ's sake, Ashley, shut the f up. Okay, I might be exaggerating a bit too much here. I don't find her that bad because her screams are a good indication to show that she's in trouble, instead of having text saying something like, "Hey asshole, the annoying bitch needs help." The silver lining is that these sections do spice up combat, so it does keep it fresh, so I dig it, despite my minor grievances. Ada returns in this game and is on top form. Sally Cahill returns to voice her, and she does the elusive and sexy spy so well. Her flirtatious back and forth with Leon is always fun to watch.
Bit of advice, try using knives next time. Works better for close encounters.
Leon. Long time no see.
It's cool to actually see Leon somewhat keep up with her instead of always falling behind, but in the end, Ada is always one step ahead. One of the other new characters in this game is Luis Serra. He's a former cop who assists Leon throughout the game, and is a welcome addition to the cast. He's very sarcastic and quick-witted, and is always good for a snacky remark.
I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics, too.
How rude! And I don't believe there's any relevance with my figure and my standing. Who are you?
Oh, excuse me, Your Highness. Perhaps the young lady might want to introduce herself first before asking someone his name.
He's a cool character with a lot of interesting backstory found in letters scattered around the place. The villain roster is brilliant in this game. They aren't all the most iconic villains in the series, but they work so well here as an ensemble. We got the Big Cheese Mendez, the really serious village chief. We got Salazar, this overconfident little worm with a fragile ego. We got Krauser, a former colleague of Leon. He always thinks he's better than Leon and never questions his own ability. And our main bad guy, Sadler, is like Emperor Palpatine with those robes, you know? He's evil and he loves being evil. We get great boss fights with these guys. Same with the rest of the bosses in the game. The only problem with the game is that it drags a bit near the end in terms of pacing, but it's not that bad as there is new gameplay sections which do keep your attention. the regenerators. Another problem for some is the introduction of QuickTime events. Now these have become a really irritating thing in recent years, but I think it's well implemented here, as the QuickTime events add to combat by allowing you to do cool melee attacks. They are also used in escape sections and cutscenes to keep you on your toes. They don't replace fun gameplay sections, so they don't get in the way of your fun. The only issue I have is how quick they are. The speed of them matches Sonic, for crying out loud. Once you complete the game, you unlock new modes, like Separate Ways, which is a mini-campaign which shows Ada's perspective during the story. She also gets a non-canon side mode where you just collect virus samples while surviving a crap ton of enemies. Nothing special here. We also get the return of mercenaries from Resident Evil 3. In this mode, we have to get a high score by getting high combos in combat. We get 4 maps and 5 characters to choose from, all with different weapons and playstyles. This gives some great variety, as every character plays differently on each map, Getting high scores rewards you with weapons for the main campaign, like a badass revolver, or if you complete the campaign on the hardest difficulty, you get this laser gun that kills everything instantly, including bosses for Christ's sake. Continuous playthroughs unlocks more guns, which adds replay value. The side modes also unlock costumes for Leon, Ashley, and Ada. All of them are purely cosmetic, besides for the suit of armor that Ashley gets, which makes her too heavy to carry by enemies, and makes her basically invincible. I think I've gone on long enough about why I love this game. It's honestly a miracle this game works so well. Capcom changed everything we knew about the series up to this point. This would usually result in a complete failure, but they pulled it off perfectly. I respect them for taking a risk, and thankfully, they stuck the landing. Resident Evil 4 gets a 10 out of 10. With the huge success of Resident Evil 4, Capcom decided to continue the series in a more action-focused direction. If people loved RE4's action, they might as well take the action to the next level. Will this action-focused strategy pay off though? Spoiler alert, it totally did for me. In 2009, 5 years after the events of Resident Evil 4, Chris Redfield has now formed the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or BSAA for short, alongside his now late friend, Jill Valentine. He's now sent to Africa to apprehend Ricardo Irving, an arms dealer who's going to sell bioorganic weapons on the black market. When he arrives, he's accompanied by Sheva Alamar, a member of BSAA's African division. They team up, but before long they are attacked by infected villagers and are forced to defend themselves. Sound familiar? The first major thing to note here is the similarities between this game and Resident Evil 4. Well, there is co-op, but we'll get there in a bit. Don't worry, we'll get there. The game plays nearly identical to Resident Evil 4. It has the same over-the-shoulder shooting, enemies behave roughly the same, and puzzles are very basic. Even the intro to the game is similar. After playing for a bit and getting used to the game's controls, you're thrusted into a crowded village and are forced to defend yourself. I don't really mind this, but it is a bit of a copy-paste thing, so yeah. One of the main gameplay differences here is co-op. For the first time in the series, you can play with a friend or by yourself with an AI, if no one likes you. I'm not crying, shut up. This is actually a groundbreaking move by Capcom. You get to have a fun action zombie game with a friend. If it wasn't for this feature, I would probably say the gameplay is a Resident Evil 4 clone and give the game a 6 out of 10 or something. It's really fun and frantic trying to survive hordes of enemies while screaming at your friend to give you some freaking ammo for the shotgun you desperately need. You and your buddy have 9 inventory slots in this kind of like 3x3 grid, which is a bit of a downgrade to the inventory system in Resident Evil 4. In that game you had this huge attaché case, and you could kind of like search your items in a Tetris kind of way. But here it's very simple and kind of unimaginative. Maybe it was done to appeal to the more casual crowd. It works fine, it's just something to point out. You can trade items with your friend, which adds a bit of depth to combat, as you want to make sure you're both properly equipped for an encounter, and have one person hoard all the ammo. Usually when I play with someone, I make one of us the ammo guy, while the other one is the medic. This is completely optional, it's entirely up to you. This is just how I play and traverse the game. Action here has definitely taken up a notch. Enemies come in bigger swarms and can morph into these freakish monsters. Even worse than Resident Evil 4, surprisingly. There's a huge variety of enemies here, but I can't for the life of me remember them. None of them really stick out. Even returning enemies like Lickers don't do that much for me. Bosses are also very unremarkable too. Most of them are good, like they're passable, like they work. Except for a few. But they aren't memorable besides for like the last 2 or 3 boss fights. It's okay, it's not that great. It's very disappointing because I loved the boss fights from Resident Evil 4, and I'm sad that Resident Evil 5 couldn't give me a similar experience. QuickTime events return here for the cutscenes and action again. The QuickTime events in fights are pretty over the top. Even more than RE4, surprisingly. But I think that adds to the charm, especially when you see thick boy Chris just destroy enemies and boulders with his huge arms. The special moves you do are really fun and spice up the combat. QuickTime events don't happen much in cutscenes, besides for a handful of times. Here's a tip. Cutscenes with QuickTime events in them usually have a lower frame rate, so they look more choppy. Just something to look out for the next time you're playing Resident Evil 5. Or if you give it a go for the first time. In terms of sound design, Capcom did a great job with weapons, but soundtrack is whatever for me. Guns pack a punch, which makes every kill satisfying. Props to the team here. Blowing away a crowd with a shotgun never gets old. Environments are very detailed, and we get a lot of different locations here. We get some similar ones to RE4, like the villages and mines and forests. We also get like swamps, factories, and tombs. I appreciate the variety, as fighting in the same location would get boring very fast. Story is kind of a step up from Resident Evil 4. Sure, it's a bit predictable, and it's basically a take over the world plot, but the things it does with characters is actually pretty interesting. Especially with Chris. Chris is great here. Sure, he's a simple character, but he's our white knight, goddammit, and I can't stop loving him for that. Also, those muscles, man. You can't not love those muscles. Sheva's pretty good too. She seems pretty basic, but she does have a bit of backstory and is genuinely a nice companion for Chris. Unfortunately, the rest of the cast are kind of mediocre. They're very forgettable. They're just there. Irving is just this loud weirdo that is also
I'm a businessman with standards.
Nothing much to him. Josh is another member of the BSAA. He's fine. He's just a nice guy who surprisingly doesn't die in this game, because this series is notoriously known for killing off side characters. Excella is the main villain's second in command, and she tries so hard to be intimidating, but she pales in comparison to the big bad himself, Albert goddamn Wesker. Wesker saves the cast. He's the perfect villain. He's smart, cocky, has a dark sense of humor, and he's got Matrix powers. What's not to love? Seeing Chris and Wesker's rivalry finally come to a head here really ups the story and makes the final boss fight with him so fun and satisfying. It almost feels like Mustafar from Revenge of the Sith in the final fight. I was half expecting Anakin and Obi-Wan to interrupt the fight, for crying out loud. The campaign is good overall, especially with a friend.
After you complete the story, you get 2 unlockable campaigns, which flesh out certain parts of the story, which is very nice. The first one is called Lost in Nightmares. It fleshes out the flashback of Chris and Jill trying to apprehend Spencer, but instead they encounter Albert Wesker. This DLC is fine, to be honest. You roam around the mansion from Ori 1, or at least an Ori 5 version of it. You solve basic puzzles, and the only enemies you come across are these like big, nearly invincible, like one-hit KO enemies. You get some weapons, but you can't upgrade them because it's all like one playthrough. It takes like an hour or less to complete. It's honestly just a pretty basic DLC. Like, I wouldn't replay it, to be honest with you. It's good for one playthrough and definitely play with a friend. It's definitely my least favourite of the 2 DLCs we get. The other one is called Desperate Escape, which in my opinion is way better. You play as Jill and Josh as you try to escape Wesker's facility. There's way more gameplay variety here. You get a better selection of weapons and there's better enemy encounters. It's just a way more fun DLC than the other one. Good variety of locations, and it isn't just a rip-off of the Ori 1 mansion. There's even a defend your position section at the end, which was actually pretty fun, to be honest. I wouldn't call this one great, but it was a fun time, so I'd recommend playing it.
You also get the return of mercenaries. It's the same concept as Resident Evil 4, but there's a far bigger roster of characters. Each character has different weapons and fighting styles, and even alternate costumes, which have different loadouts. I really like the customization here, but I kind of prefer Resident Evil 4's simplicity. Please don't hurt me. This game has been known for ruining Resident Evil because of the new direction it took after Resident Evil 4. But it's almost the exact same game as Resident Evil 4, and people don't have a problem with that game, so I just don't see the problem. Sure, it's pretty much an action game with a smidge of horror, but the gameplay is done so well that's alright in my book. If you take it as is and grab a buddy to play, it's a great time. Is it as good as Resident Evil 4? No. But it's a solid effort. Resident Evil 5 gets an 8 out of 10. Despite people being skeptical with the new direction, Resident Evil 5 was a massive success, becoming Capcom's best-selling Resident Evil game in the franchise. Capcom were making bank with this new style of Resident Evil, and they weren't going to stop. But it seems that with their next game, they might have jumped the shark. Literally in this case. Resident Evil 6 doesn't have one linear story told throughout. In actuality, the game is split into 4 different campaigns, which are all connected together to make one narrative. This was very big for the time. Capcom were bringing together a lot of fan-favorite characters and newcomers and making them cross over. Since we have 4 campaigns, I'm going to talk about each one individually. I'm not going to go in-depth with things like plot, just a general overview of gameplay, story and setting. I'm going to start with Leon's campaign. On the 29th of June 2013, the US President attempts to publicly reveal the truth behind the Raccoon City incident and the government's dealings with Umbrella to end further bioterrorist activity. However, the venue he's in is hit by a virus and people start turning into zombies, including himself. Leon, who is assigned to him, and another agent named Helena are forced to put him down. Everything seems to be crazy and out of order, but Helena claims to know more about this attack. Leon agrees to assist her and find out what happened and put a stop to this conspiracy. Resident Evil 6 is a third-person over-the-shoulder action shooter, same as the last 2 games. The difference here is that you can move and shoot. Very innovative. Yeah, it's a weird thing to note, but you can fight on the fly now, which works surprisingly well. There's a wide variety of weaponry at your disposal. Unfortunately, guns don't feel that satisfying to shoot. They don't have that punch or like oomph that previous games had. You know there's something wrong when the shotgun doesn't feel good to shoot anymore, and you just use it because you kind of have to kill, you know, the zombies. Yeah, that's just disturbing. Thankfully, it's made up for with the new melee combat system. Every playable character can perform a series of moves and combos on enemies, and it's brilliant. It's spectacular. We're not playing Resident Evil anymore. It's now freaking Street Fighter. Even though this probably shouldn't be in a Resident Evil game, it's so over the top and fun that I can't dispute the overall flair that it gives to the experience. RKOing enemies as Leon never got old for me. Leon's campaign feels like a combination of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 4 in terms of tone. The first half has moments reminiscent of Leon's first adventure, with a town in the US getting overrun with zombies and discovering secret labs. The second half delves more into the over-the-top action that the series has now become known for. This is nice as it appeals to both sides of the fandom that prefer one or both styles. Leon's campaign feels the most well-rounded of the lot. You have some horror moments with a good bit of action and some light puzzle solving, and we actually get zombies. The previous two games didn't have zombies, they just had parasite-controlled people. Story is fine once again, it's just a basic mystery plot with zombies. Characters are the main drive here once again. Leon is way more tough and dark here, with a bit of wit. He's grown a lot since Raccoon City, and I like seeing his change throughout the years. He's now reached action hero status. He's now dual-wielding pistols and riding down caves with a zombie shark. Yes, a zombie shark. And he fights a T-Rex. Yeah, Jesus Christ, what happened to this franchise? His partner, Helena, is pretty basic. The game tries to make you sympathize with her because of her tragic events that preceded the game, but I didn't really care. Ada returns again because of course she does. When Leon's around, Ada is always there. She's always great, and I like the plotline of her potentially being a full-on villain or a bioorganic weapon. Yeah, it's weird, but it's certainly unique. Leon and Ada get some good romantic scenes here, which is always appreciated. The main villain, Simmons, is very forgettable besides for when he keeps on returning near the end of the game. The most fun parts of the campaign for me is surviving these huge set pieces that should not be survivable whatsoever. There's a lot of action, but it never got repetitive as there's always something new in each section, no matter how ridiculous it got. The pacing near the end of the game could be a bit of a problem for some due to some bosses that appear, but I found them mostly fun to battle, even if they were a bit bullet spongy. Leon's campaign feels the most Resident Evil, if you can believe me, which is why I like it the most out of the bunch. Sure, it's over the top, but at least it goes all out with its ridiculousness and makes it a memorable experience. I'd rather something memorable than just plain old forgettable. Chris's story starts with him being drunk in a bar and not acting like himself. He's confronted by members of the BSAA and he's told to come back as China is under attack by a new bioterrorist group named Neo Umbrella. Chris reluctantly accepts and joins back as the leader for some reason. He's supposed to have amnesia and the BSAA entrusts him with leading a squad by himself. Yeah, that doesn't really end well. Anyways, Chris's campaign is by far the most action-packed. In Leon's, there's a good balance of melee and gun use with a variety of enemy encounters, while Chris's fights are mostly just shooting. You shoot enemies with guns and spider legs, and you can ride a frickin' jet. A frickin' jet! Yeah, it's now turned into frickin' Crimson Skies or frickin' Ace Combat. There's no subtlety here, which ain't a bad thing, but it does lead to a lot of repetition later on in the game. You can melee here too, but you're most likely just going to get shot for doing so. Chris still hits like a tank though, so there's nothing to worry about there. I think by this point in Resident Evil, Chris is the strongest being on Earth, even stronger than the huge monsters in these games. I can buy that. Why not? Bosses are okay, besides for the final one, as that one goes through multiple phases, and when you finally kill it, it's so gratifying. I think I should mention the visuals and sound here. Environments look nice, but when you take a closer look, some textures look a bit lazy. I feel like Capcom cut a few corners here, as they expected you to just sprint around and not focus on the smaller details. There's a good bit of location variety throughout all 4 campaigns, but there are times where campaigns overlap due to the story, but that's not a terrible issue. Soundtrack is just fine, it's kind of a running theme here, huh? There's a few good tracks, but the rest is just there to fill an empty space. Guns and explosives sound good, but they still don't really pack a punch, but okay, hey, props to sound design. Chris's story is not that great, unfortunately. The amnesia plotline goes nowhere and it turns into a revenge consumes you story. It's not like well told, which is the problem. The story does improve as it goes along, mainly because of the bromance between Chris and Piers. I love watching these two. I didn't think I would like Piers as much because he is like a newcomer and he's partnered with the boulder punching legend himself. But I loved his undying loyalty to Chris, and it's really admirable, and it's just funny to see him get defensive when someone threatens or questions Chris's authority. Chris isn't that great at first during the campaign, but he improves throughout, especially in the final chapter. Emotional stuff, that's all I'll say. Chris's campaign suffers the most due to repetitive gameplay and feeling like a Call of Duty clone, but it's saved by solid characters and a good ending. On the 24th of December 2012, Jake Mueller is working in Edonia as a mercenary when one of his comrades suddenly attacks him due to infection. Jake defends himself and is confronted by a grown-up Sherry Birkin, surprisingly. Yeah, it's been 14 years since Resident Evil 2 and she's decided to become an agent. She's assigned to find Jake as his blood has antibodies that can be extracted to make a vaccine for the new virus that's causing chaos. He begrudgingly accepts, but expects to be paid millions for his blood. Jake's campaign is probably the most simple in terms of story. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just a bit predictable, as you can tell that Jake will start to warm up to Sherry pretty quickly. It's the tough character becoming soft by the kind partner story, but I liked it. Jake's an asshole at first, but he's very charismatic, and he becomes a pretty compelling character by the end of it. Sherry is the perfect character to be partnered with Jake. She's kind, but takes no shit from him. She's also extremely cute. Like, look at those puppy eyes. I love how the story expands upon her character and gives insight into what she was like after Ori 2. I was intrigued in how Sherry and Jake bonded with each other by sharing past experiences and talking about how they're actually pretty similar. This blossoms into kind of a romance that I honestly really dig. These two really work well together, especially at the end. They win with the power of love. Like, how can you not love that? Now that I'm talking about Jake's campaign, I cannot forget to mention this guy. This is Ustanok, a hulking bioweapon similar to Nemesis, and its only goal is to kill Jake. Okay, this is like totally a rip-off of Nemesis, but like Ustanok has some cool gimmicks with his arm that changes things up. He chases you throughout the game, and you get different types of gameplay with him. You get chases, stealth sections, and bosses. You get the point. Almost all the boss fights are him, and they're all good. But I won't dare spoil the final one. Actually, you know what? I will. You literally have a one-on-one fist fight with this behemoth of a freaking monster. It's so ridiculous, yet so amazing. It's a joy to play. I don't know what Capcom were smoking, but I want some. I should probably mention that you aren't just shooting in this story. Jake can do unique fighting moves that are really fun to pull off, especially against Ustanok. Jake is really acrobatic, which can be used to get to certain areas. Jake gets a lot of unique stuff, while Sherry kind of just feels left out. She gets a 3-burst pistol and an electric baton, but like, come on, Jake's moves are better. It's a bit one-sided, which is a shame. It's not as one-sided as the final campaign though. Oh god, we'll get there. Jake's campaign thrives from its simplicity, as the basic ideas shown are done really well. Gameplay never got boring, and the story was solid throughout. On to Ada's campaign. Ugh. Ada's story is intertwined with the rest of the cast, but the main points of her campaign is that she's framed for committing terrorist acts for Neo Umbrella, even though she's never done such a thing. She's trying to find out who framed her and clear her name. I'm just going to say this immediately, this campaign is not good. It's okay. It just feels like the leftovers of the other campaigns were smashed together and here we go, here's your DLC campaign. I just didn't enjoy traversing these levels. To make matters worse, if you play co-op, you get a faceless merc named Agent. How unimaginative and lazy is that? He's clearly an afterthought, as he wasn't even in the game at first. He was patched in later and he's useless. All he can do is shoot things. Sure, that might sound great, but he can't do basic things like open doors. It's a joke. It's just a pathetic joke. The campaign's only purpose is to show you what Ada was doing the whole time, and she appears in everyone else's campaigns at some point or another, and to tie up loose plot threads. I'm not putting much time into this section because Capcom clearly didn't either. It's an okay campaign, nothing special. We get a lot of side content here with this game. I didn't get to play a lot of it besides for Mercenaries though. I played a lot of Mercenaries in this game. It's honestly the best version of Mercenaries in my opinion. We get a huge assortment of characters here, with most getting alternate costumes. As usual, all of them have different weapons, but they also have different fighting styles, which make them either easier or harder to play with on certain maps. We get 10 maps here, with most of them being solid. They're all not too big, but they're not too small, so combos aren't super easy to get, but not too difficult either. Getting a high combo is so satisfying. You could do things like quickly pull off a cool melee combo, or counter them, and then quickly cap an enemy's head, and then grab another enemy's weapon and use it against them. Oh, so good. I also have to mention that the music here is a bop. I can't say more here, it's just a well done mode. I know I'll get a lot of hate for this, but I actually really like this game. This is often cited as the worst mainline Resident Evil game, but I can't give it that hate. It's got problems, yes. I think that the game could be too linear at times, and most enemies are forgettable, and yes, the game can be a bit too ridiculous and action-packed, but I don't know what you're expecting. Ori 4 and 5 were both action-orientated Resident Evil games, and they made a lot of money, so of course Capcom are going to capitalize on that and go all out. As a Resident Evil game, it's probably like a 5 out of 10, but as a fun action game that just happens to share the same name, it's a 7 out of 10. Around the same time as Resident Evil 6, Capcom tried to appeal to the handheld market. It seems that they wanted to expand their horizons and see how our Ori game would do on portable systems. So during the same year as Ori 6, we got Resident Evil Revelations. Set between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, Jill Valentine and her partner, Parker Luciani, are sent to investigate a supposedly abandoned ship called the Queen Zenobia. They're looking for Chris Redfield, who has gone missing and his last known location was on the ship. When Jill and Parker arrive, they discover strange and horrifying things and are wrapped up in an evil plot. They are forced to survive on the ship and find out what happened to the Queen Zenobia. There's a lot more to the plot, but I won't delve much into details here. I'll say that it's a solid story. It's a mystery story that feels like a TV show. The game is split into chapters, and every time you start a new chapter you get a recap. I'm guessing this was done to appeal to the portable crowd. This game was on DS after all, 3DS I should say. I'm guessing for like the average 3DS, user, it'd be more convenient because if they can play one chapter, and then if they didn't play the game for a day or two, they can come back and get a recap, so they're all caught up. This is fine, but it can get a bit tiresome after a while, especially if you're going through like a big chunk of the game out in one sitting. I played this game on the Xbox One, and it looks nice enough, but it probably looked amazing for 3DS. Props to the team here. Environments look good, but the layout is very linear. It's a bit uninspired. The linear design was, I'm guessing, done for casual gamers. The game is third person over the shoulder once again, but you don't have melee combat here, which is a bit of a shame. I really liked it. Rest in peace, Ori 6 combat. You can still move and shoot, which is still fun to do, but you still don't get good feedback from weapons besides for the shotgun. That was saved, thank God. To make matters worse, most enemies feel like bullet sponges and as a result are not fun to take down. Enemy variety is fine, but uninspired. I can't name one of them. They're just that unoriginal or just that boring to me. Bosses range from okay to good. Most of them suffer from just feeling bullet spongy, but they had creepy designs, and added a bit of horror to a game that lacked it. My favorite fight was this one with the communications officer because of how it's set up and how the boss looks. You get a bit of backstory to this guy in notes too, which adds to the story of the Queen Zenobia. Characters in the game range from bad to good. Jill and Chris return here in this game, and they're alright. Nothing really big happens to them, they're kind of just there. Like, they're good company, but nothing really happens to them. Jill's partner, Parker, was a genuinely entertaining character, though. And he added levity to the horrible circumstances the characters find themselves in. Chris's partner, Jessica, is an annoying bimbo that is just there for sex appeal.
I don't see a thing. I thought the Mediterranean was just like a big lake.
Be patient.
She does develop towards the end, but I still didn't really like her. Other characters were fine, but one of the main villains tries to be a good guy, but he looks like a Count Dooku ripoff, so it's kind of obvious that this guy is, not a good guy. Yeah, totally not bad. Also, this game loves to, quote-unquote, kill off characters and then just resurrect them. It doesn't make you worry for the character's safety, as they will probably be fine. Pacing was very weird in the game as well. The end to each chapter felt like a cliffhanger to an episode of a drama, because most of them end with a reveal of some kind, which gets old very fast. The game feels like it goes on too long as well, because you kill a huge boss, and you ride off into the sunset and you think it's all over, but then the game gives you a bunch of exposition. You're like, gotta do one more thing, so you travel out to another area and fight the final boss. The fight is fine and normal, but ridiculously hard on the hardest difficulty called Inferno mode. The fight goes on for way too long and your partner never helps out. For f***'s sake, Chris, can you please help out? Thanks. Thanks for nothing.
I almost forgot to add this part in my original script, but there is an extra mode in the game called Raid mode. It's not like Mercenaries per se. The mode is more about going down linear paths, mainly from the campaign, and getting high scores by killing enemies with different characters and different weapons. You can play as all the characters from the campaign and a few others as well, and you can also get different costumes. The mode even has its own meta. Like there's a shop where you can get like different things like upgrades and weapons that have different stats and stuff. And like it actually is pretty in depth. Like I actually can see someone putting a lot of time into it. I personally wouldn't put a lot of time into it myself. I did play a good bit of it to kind of get an opinion on it. It is pretty fun. I actually will admit it is pretty fun. But I don't know. Like I wasn't like, particularly in love with this game, so it's not. I wouldn't put a lot of time into it now, but if you're into this type of thing, going through linear hallways from the campaign and racking up high scores, then yeah, I can definitely see someone getting into it. Like it's definitely somewhat fun.
I have a lot of issues with this game, but I don't hate it. For a game made for the 3DS, it's actually good. I like the ship setting as it's very unique and we never saw something like this before. You got to explore all of it, which I really like. It's very satisfying getting to unlock different areas of the ship and getting to explore them. Soundtrack is good, my favourite obviously being the save room theme. The save room themes are always the best in these games. I wouldn't recommend this to Ori fans or newcomers if this is like their first game, but if you've played a bunch of the games already and you see this game on sale somewhere, give it a shot. Resident Evil Revelations gets a 6 out of 10. The biggest complaint with Resident Evil 6 was that the franchise wasn't scary anymore. Fans were getting tired of the action-focused gameplay of the later Resident Evil games, so while the main team at Capcom were focused on the next numbered entry, another team worked on a sequel to the spin-off series. With this sequel, they tried to win back fans of classic survival horror. Let's see if they succeeded. Revelation 2's story is split into 4 separate episodes that came out at different times following the release of the first episode of the game. The story takes place between Resident Evil 5 and 6, and follows Claire Redfield and Moira Burton, who is the daughter of Barry Burton. Claire and Moira work for a biohazard prevention agency named TerraSave. While attending an office party, the two of them and other TerraSave workers are captured by armed mercenaries and taken to an island. When Claire and Moira wake up, they notice bracelets are strapped to them to record their fear. They hear a woman's voice over an intercom who claims to be the Overseer and is monitoring their every move with the bracelets and cameras. During the first episode, Moira calls for help via radio and Barry comes to help, fully determined to rescue his daughter. When he arrives at the island, he encounters a little girl named Natalia, who has unique abilities and becomes Barry's guide of sorts. Together, they search the island for Moira and Claire. First of all, in terms of horror, this game is a huge step up compared to every other game after Resident Evil 4. The locations and atmosphere give me Walking Dead and Saw vibes, and it's a breath of fresh air. I don't mind telling you that I was on edge a few times while playing. The entire game takes place on the island, but the setting itself never got old for me, mainly because you get to explore different areas and you have different gameplay sections in each episode as well. The game being split into episodes doesn't really do much for me, and in my opinion it's completely obsolete because it only works if you bought the game back when it was released. Episodes came out every week or so anyway, so there wasn't like a huge gap between the releases of each episode. I just don't see why they just didn't release them together. Episodes are only like 2 to 3 hours long, so you're only looking at like an 8 to 10 hour adventure. They probably wanted to garner hype by ending each episode on a cliffhanger, but I feel like people would be more inclined to come back to the game if you just gave them a full package. If you ignore that, what do we got here? Well, Revelations 2 is a third-person over-the-shoulder shooter, as per usual, we get it. You can move and shoot again, and you can even crouch. You could never crouch before, which is very weird when you think about it now. This game has some of the best movement in the series. It's not clunky or restrictive, it controls really well and it makes exploring the environments very fun. Shooting is finally good again. Every weapon feels satisfying to fire, especially Barry's Magnum. Oh, Barry's Magnum, that beauty. The enemies you shoot at, however, are not memorable at all. You've got your crazy human-like enemies, while you got your more deformed and mutated enemies. None of them interested me, besides for one that turns invisible and only Natalia can see. Revelations 2 makes you play as Claire, Moira, Barry, and Natalia. When you play as Claire and Moira, Claire is the one who dispatches enemies, while Moira plays more of a support role. She has a flashlight that can blind enemies temporarily and can be used to find hidden objects. Barry serves the same role as Claire, while Natalia can see invisible enemies and see them through walls, and she also can spot hidden objects in the environment. Finding hidden items is actually a pretty cool concept, but it gets repetitive pretty quickly. But you can get some good loot from it, so it's almost worth the trouble, but you can ignore it, it's not the biggest worry in the world. The system of having a support character help the main character is a double-edged sword, as constantly switching can get on your nerves after a while, and inviting a friend to join isn't that fun either, as one of you will have less things to do than the other one. It's a cool concept that should have been fleshed out more. We have an inventory system here like previous games, but it's extremely simple. Revelations 1 didn't even have one, and Resident Evil 6 one was even more basic than this one. This one's fine, but it's like whatever. Everything takes up the same amount of space, including crafting items. You can craft items like explosives and health items, which incentivizes exploration. Puzzles are actually pretty good. A lot of them involve you trying to solve a trap set by the Overseer, with my favorite being this puzzle with the lasers. In terms of characters, only the main characters were good. It was nice to finally get a game with Claire again, and her inclusion really adds to the experience. She's older now, and she acts a bit more like a motherly figure to Moira. Kinda like her Resident Evil 2 days, huh? Moira is pretty good too. She's the young, troubled youth stereotype, if you know what I mean, with a swearing problem. Claire and Moira seem like an unlikely pair, but they work pretty well together. I like the backstory that Moira gets, in which we get to see her strained relationship with her father, Barry. I know I like saying like that, but anyways, and we also get to see her fear of guns. Barry is great here, and it's so nice to finally play as him. He was such an iconic side character in the first game, and it was a pleasure to play as him here. Seeing him being worried sick for his daughter makes it so easy to root for him. I know it's simple and overdone, but I like it here, so don't attack me please. Natalia is definitely the weakest of the bunch, as she doesn't have much character herself, and relies on Barry to be compelling, as he acts kinda like a surrogate father to her. The main villain, the Overseer, reveals her identity later on, and they do have a cool backstory and plan, but I didn't really find this person that memorable. Besides for the final fight, that was cool, trust me, like the final shot is like really good. One of my major gripes with the game though is that it drags a bit near the end, as finding the same forgettable enemies finally starts to wear on you. And the story does have some problems, particularly with the endings. There's two endings in the game, a bad ending and a good ending. The problem is that the ending is dictated by a random one-off choice that's hidden, well kinda hidden, it's like, I don't know, it's kinda weird to explain. And the game gives it to you at a point that you can just easily like miss or mess it up. This never happened before this point in the game, and it never happens afterwards. It just feels shoehorned in. After you complete the main story, you get two story DLCs. The first one called Little Miss. This explores how Natalia met Barry. This is okay. The gameplay is orientated around stealth, as Natalia can't fight these enemies head on. You get a dark clone of yourself. It's a bit weird, but anyways, this clone can't be detected by enemies, so they can kind of be a scout for you. I'm not that big of a fan of stealth here, as it's very hard to know the field of vision of the monsters because of their designs. I got so many unfair game overs that put me in a bad mood, and I just wanted to get it over with. This just wasn't for me. Thankfully, it's not part of the main story and just DLC. The next DLC is called The Struggle, and it expands upon events from the main story, but which I won't go into here because, you know, spoilers. The whole gimmick here is that you have a limited amount of lives and you have to survive through a variety of situations. I did not like this DLC. It starts off fine with hunting animals and finding off a few enemies, but then you throw into an arena filled with a bunch of them, and it's just completely unfair. Like, you don't even get that much ammo either. It's like impossible. If you manage to survive that, then you have to do more broken stealth, and it pissed me off. I got so mad that I just stopped playing. I did not finish it.
I also forgot to record a raid mode section for this video as well. This was due to the fact that I was very frustrated with the DLCs, so I never got around to it, but I did actually get around to it eventually, and it's more the same really. If you played raid mode in Revelations 1, it's almost the exact same experience here. Like there is some tweaks and it's definitely more advanced, but like the same kind of gameplay loop is there. You know, you have to go through kind of linear courses with characters, leveling them up, you know, just get the end, you know, just get high scores, and you know, there's a whole system you can do with the guns and perks and stuff, and there's more characters and costumes and all that, and there's you know, way more perks you can unlock. Yeah, and there's you actually have to unlock every level individually. It's not like in Revelations 1 where you could go to the final level if you want, but you'd be severely underleveled if you did that. So in this game, you actually have to unlock every individual level, while in Revelations 1 you can just go to the end if you want to kill yourself. Yeah, but it's mostly the same experience. If you liked the raid mode in Revelations 1, you'll like the raid mode in Revelations 2. So yeah, and I say that I didn't play it in my original footage at the end here, but yeah, just ignore that. I actually played it now, so yeah, just ignore that little bit at the end of the review here.
In my opinion, Revelations 2 has more problems than the first Revelations, but I think it succeeds better in the gameplay, story, and characters. Just stick with the main story and possibly raid mode. Resident Evil Revelations 2 gets a 7 out of 10. Revelations 2 sold well enough, but the game failed to garner enough attention to keep fans interested in the franchise. Capcom needed to do something big to revive the Resident Evil IP. A year before the game's announcement, Capcom released a first-person horror-themed VR demo named Kitchen, which ran on Capcom's new Ori engine. The demo was done to show off the Ori engine's capabilities and how a VR horror game would be received. Its plot is very basic. You play as an unknown character who's tied to a chair. Another man who is knocked on the floor next to you wakes up and attempts to free you, but is interrupted by a crazy woman with a knife. He attempts to fight her off, but his efforts are futile. Everything goes quiet until the woman appears in front of you and it cuts to black. This demo garnered a lot of interest, but no one suspected it was a Resident Evil game. I'm guessing this was mainly due to previous games because of their action-orientated style, and also because no other Resident Evil game beforehand was in first person. But on the 13th of June 2016, Capcom released the demo titled Resident Evil 7, The Beginning Hour. The demo started with an unknown character waking up in a house. You're in first person again, like the teaser. You have to find items to solve puzzles, and you can access a security tape that shows how the two people from the Kitchen demo got captured. The demo received a lot of praise for being very atmospheric and actually genuinely being scary. The only criticism that people had was that it didn't feel like Resident Evil, and they also stated that the game felt like PT. PT was a third-person horror teaser that came out 2 years prior, but it was cancelled. Fans probably assumed that this was Capcom's way of capitalizing on PT's success. Capcom was put to the test here, and needed to prove themselves with a new direction. So on the 24th of January 2017, we got Resident Evil 7. In June 2017, Ethan Winters receives an email from his thought-to-be dead wife. She says that she's in Dulvey, Louisiana. So Ethan, without a shred of hesitation, goes off to get his wife, without even calling the authorities, for fuck's sake. Seriously, like, this can't be over in like 5 minutes if you just called the cops and filed a missing persons report. He arrives at an abandoned estate and finds out it's actually not as abandoned as he thought. I'm not going to go too much into the story here as usual, because some moments need to be experienced without spoilers. People were skeptical that this game wouldn't be good. I think it's safe to say that Capcom hit it out of the goddamn park. Resident Evil 7 is a first-person horror game that on paper doesn't look or feel like Resident Evil, but the gameplay shows how changing the camera can't ruin the classic Resident Evil formula. Resident Evil 7 feels like the original games the most, despite the initial changes. You are stuck in one large location with a few surrounding areas to explore, where you complete puzzles, fight enemies, and defeat bosses. Puzzles are really good here. There's a good variation of them. For example, you got puzzles that require you to find an obscure item to progress, key puzzles, and there are shadow puzzles as well, where you have to place an item in a certain way to cast a shadow on a painting to unlock a door or a secret compartment of some kind. Completion of said puzzles results in additional items like steroids, yeah, steroids, which upgrade your health, or psychostimulants, which reveal hidden items. Certain guns can only be found in the game if you complete puzzles, so you better keep an eye out for these weapons. You probably forgot about this, but traditional save rooms and item boxes have finally returned. We haven't got these since Resident Evil 0. They're a welcome addition, obviously, and the save room theme is always great. The Ori engine is beautiful here. The locations you explore look disgusting and frightening, yet beautiful in a weird kind of way. It's a sight to behold. I can never get tired of looking at this game's world. Props to Capcom for making this really great engine. Gunplay is great here. It hasn't been this good since Resident Evil 4. Every weapon has that oomph when you fire, even the standard pistol. You get a small yet solid bunch of weapons that all have their own pros and cons. For example, the shotgun is powerful, but only can shoot at close range, and has very limited ammo. The grenade launcher is powerful, but it can only fire one bullet at a time, leaving you vulnerable. You get the point. You also can block in the game, which actually comes in handy a lot, as properly timing it can severely reduce the damage taken from an enemy. Unfortunately, the enemies you fight against are pretty uninspired. There are these like black mutated monsters called molded, which are the only standard enemy you face. You get different versions of them, like these spider ones or these big fat ones that take a lot of damage and spit everywhere. These guys. These different types of the same enemy don't feel that unique because, you know, they're the same enemy. Like, they're just kind of boring, but I will say that pulling off a headshot is still gratifying to accomplish. The saving grace for enemies is the Baker family. Holy shit, this family is awesome. They are all deranged lunatics that give me Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes. They're all infected with some sort of virus that makes them super strong, and it gives them additional abilities as well. This family has kidnapped you and now want you dead. The families serve as the bosses throughout the game, and they are so fun to fight against and are genuinely terrifying. They're really unique in terms of how you encounter them. Jack Baker, the father, patrols the main house and will chase you everywhere if he spots you. When you eventually have to fight him, he's hilarious to watch. He can literally try and run you over. Jack gets a few boss fights, and they're all fun. But if you're playing on Madhouse difficulty, which is the hardest, well, good luck because they are hard as hell. Marguerite, the wife, patrols the old house and can summon bugs to attack you. She by far has the creepiest mutated design of the lot. Look at that creepy bitch. Lucas, the son, isn't much of a physical threat, so he rigs rooms filled with booby traps to kill you. There's a few other fights, but that's going into spoiler territory, so I won't go there. The Bakers are the only memorable characters in this game, unfortunately. Ethan's very bland, and he's only there to be a vessel for the player to experience the horror. Ethan's wife Mia is not great either, but at least she's got some interesting backstory that relates to the main story. There's a few one-off characters, but they're just there to progress the story, so very, very one note. The only other memorable character is Zoe Baker, the daughter, who isn't a crazy bitch and actually helps Ethan. She's got a few good moments in the story, and I genuinely felt bad for her, as she had to survive for years against this deranged family. The only other major gripes I have here is that there's a portion of the game near the end that really drags down the pacing for me. I didn't find it that fun, and it's just there to reveal plot details. There's also a point in the game where you're presented with a choice, and it's kind of crappy because it's a pretty easy decision. Plus, the game basically punishes you if you decide to pick one of the two options, because the developers considered one of them bad, and it's like, oh whoops, you chose wrong, here's the bad ending, fuck you. It's just so lazy, and I wish that it wasn't there in the first place. But all in all, this was a kick-ass return to form. Capcom once again took a big risk, like Resident Evil 4, and they pulled it off masterfully. Resident Evil 7 gets an 8.5 out of 10. Resident Evil 7 was a humongous success. It received critical praise while selling over 7 million copies. Resident Evil 7, funny. Yeah, I think it just about got fans' interest back. Just by an inch. So would Capcom now make Resident Evil 8 or Revelations 3? Well, not exactly. Following the release of Resident Evil 1 Remake back in 2002, Capcom were considering making a remake to Resident Evil 2, with the similar treatment that they gave to Resident Evil 1 Remake. However, series creator Shinji Mikami did not want to divert development away from Resident Evil 4, so it never saw the light of day. That was until August 2015, when Capcom announced a remake of Resident Evil 2 was in the works. It wasn't until Sony's E3 2018 press conference that we got a trailer and some gameplay for Resident Evil 2 Remake. Capcom stated that they wanted to keep the spirit of the original game alive while updating it for a modern audience. Did this remake work out for Capcom? Spoiler alert, hell yeah. Resident Evil 2 Remake has the same general plot as the original, besides for a few tweaks in the story and more depth given to characters. Leon has gone from Daddy Leon to Babyface Leon, and he's so cute. And Claire is rocking that sick red leather jacket, looking badass. The main leads are once again great here. The actors' performances respect the previous ones, while also giving their own new modern interpretations. I just love these two. Leon has gone back to being the ultimate Boy Scout, which is a great contrast to Ada, who is always pulling his chain by not answering his basic questions or just plain old teasing. Ada is a bit different here, however. In the original, she claims to be looking for her boyfriend John, but is secretly working for another organization that wants the G-Fires, the main virus of Resident Evil 2. In the remake, she claims to be working for the FBI when she meets Leon, and she is way more aggressive and to the point with Leon here, when it comes to her apparent goals and attitude. We know she's keeping secrets, but we never know what she's hiding. Leon breaking down her barriers and thus being more honest and trusting of Leon is really nice and cute to look at, and I genuinely buy the chemistry between these two. A good love story in the zombie apocalypse? What's not to like? Claire is mostly the same to her original counterpart, but she's way more aggressive here, and shit talks a lot of enemies, which is a bit of a contrast to the soft-spoken Claire of the original. That's really the only difference here, as she still plays the key motherly figure to Sherry in this game, and it's done really well here, like the original. Sherry has gotten a bit more depth here, and I think it's a definite improvement to her original self. I like the dynamic the two had in the original, but I buy it more here. I say it's probably because we actually can see their faces emoting instead of seeing these polygonal bobbleheads. All the side characters' roles are expanded upon too, my personal favourite being Marvin. Marvin is the only cop left in the RPD and is on his last legs. He helps you out in the early game and is good company to have around. But it's the subtle bits like how depending on who you play as first, he interacts with each protagonist differently. With Claire, he's very calm and friendly towards her. You can tell by the way he talks to her that he has a huge respect for her brother Chris, as they would be, work colleagues. With Leon, who's the cop, he's way more strict and authoritative, and is quick to give him very direct instructions on how to combat the undead, and to not make his mistake. These little character moments really add to the overall experience, and I love it. William Birkin doesn't get much depth, as he's mostly just a monster for the runtime, besides for one scene where they show him in a somewhat sympathetic light. His wife, Annette Birkin, gets more depth than him, as we see her violent and caring sides while exploring her addiction to her work. The police chief, Brian Irons, gets expanded upon in areas, but is a slight downgrade for me. I like him here, but there isn't much secrecy with him. He's a secondary antagonist, but in the original, it was hard to tell if he was a villain or not, because he had a nice and calming persona, while still showing a bit of uncertainty to where his agendas truly lie. This version is way more to the point, which works well, but not as well. Now let's get to gameplay. Resident Evil 2 doesn't follow the first-person format of Resident Evil 7, or the fixed camera angles of the original game, but instead goes back to the third-person over-the-shoulder camera, like Resident Evil 4. Some people may like or dislike this change. I liked the first-person camera in Resident Evil 7, and it fitted the game's atmosphere perfectly, but I think the first-person camera would have made traversing areas a bit too claustrophobic in the Resident Evil 2 remake here. And Capcom said that they wanted to update the game for modern audiences, so they must have thought this was the way to do it. I like the camera position here, as we can actually see our protagonists, which makes it easier to root and relate to them. Shooting is a bit of a mix between Resident Evil 6 and 7. Resident Evil 6 because of third-person moving and shooting, and Resident Evil 7 because of the precise aiming present in that game. You can move and shoot, but if you want to make precise shots, you have to stay still and wait for the crosshairs to stabilize for an easier shot. Getting your shots to hit is really hard because the enemies in this game are so hard to hit and are really scary, especially the zombies. The Ori engine does such a good job of showing off how disgusting these undead creatures are. The zombie AI is so well implemented. They move in such an unpredictable manner that it's hard to land a proper shot in them before they get your neck snacked on. Every other enemy is good, with my personal favourite being the Lickers. They make the return here, and it's a kick-ass welcome to say the least. These things are 10 times scarier due to character design and sound effects. The noises they make are nail-biting, and they always give me crippling anxiety. The weapons you use here are in the same boat as Resident Evil 7, with not having much while still being solid. Both characters get a starting pistol, while the rest are different. For example, Leon gets a shotgun, while Claire gets a grenade launcher. All weapons can be upgraded, and it's super satisfying to upgrade these weapons. Trust me. I say that a lot. I say trust me a lot. Well, you should trust me. It's my review, goddammit. Knives and grenades are not put in the same weapon category here. You can use both as you usually would, but the game has a new defense system where if you get grabbed, you can either take the damage and move on, or you can attack the enemy with a knife or a grenade with varying levels of effectiveness. Both options get you out of the grab with the expense of losing that item. Knives can be retrieved if you kill the enemy afterwards or later on. I really like this mechanic, as you have to think strategically in what way you use them. Would I take a knife now and take up inventory space, or risk it, and if I do take it, should I use on the first enemy that grabs me, or when I'm low on health? You get the picture. The soundtrack of the original game is brilliant and iconic, but unfortunately the remake doesn't live up to its standards. It's fine, mostly just atmospheric tracks, besides for 2 tracks that work really well for me, and they both belong to Mr. X. Mr. X returns and is 100 times better than his original counterpart. In the original, He's a tyrant that only appears in the character's B scenario. Mr. X was cool and a genuine threat, but he only appeared in scripted events and a few times during normal gameplay. With Mr. X in the remake, however, he appears in both scenarios and he chases you everywhere in the police station at all times, unless you manage to find a save room or lose it while it's chasing you. To make matters worse, X appears earlier in the B scenario run, which gives you very little breathing room in the opening hours. I don't want to be stuck in a room with Mr. X and a liquor. God save me from this torment. Jesus Christ. Worst points in the game for me. Mr. X completely changed up your playstyle from here on out. You have to rush and think on the fly, or suffer his falcon punch. Mr. X is very intimidating because of how he always walks and is rarely phased by gunfire. You can hurt him if you want, you can shoot him and eventually he'll go down, but it's only temporary and it's just a waste of ammo, so don't bother. Mr. X also has these very loud footsteps, which always put me on edge and makes me second guess where I should go next, because for all I know, he's right outside the next door and he wants to start a social interaction with me. His music when he chases you just takes the cake. Just listen. This is one of the 2 tracks I said that were brilliant. The other one being Mr. X's boss theme. Mr. X is a huge improvement here, and in a weird way, I'm glad he made me shit my pants while playing. Thank you. There aren't many areas in this game, besides for a few huge locations, with 1 or 2 smaller locations, which might turn a few players off. The best environment is obviously the RPD. Seeing it updated for modern graphics just gave me so much joy and horror, as I realized I had to fight these things in it. The puzzles really add to the station, and to the other areas. They try to explain a lot of these puzzles in convincing enough ways, for Resident Evil standard anyway, and they are executed really well. The puzzles never felt impossible, but never too easy. A healthy balance of easy and hard. This doesn't need to be said, but this game is beautiful. Capcom really worked hard to make this game look and run so well in the Ori engine. You can see every penny on screen. The lighting, sound, and the little details really make this, ironically undead environment, feel alive. Now I know I'm showering this game with praise, but I do have to address one major error on the devs' part here. This could turn some people off from playing the game. The scenarios in this game are severely downgraded. In the original, you had a zapping system, which meant that if you took certain items in one playthrough, it would affect the other. That's no longer here, and the story has some continuity errors when you compare the A and B scenarios together. The original had a consistent story throughout, while the remake acts like whoever character you play as first has the center stage, while the other character just kind of stops existing until the very end. Claire and Leon only interact once after they get split up in the intro, and once more at the end. This is really disappointing, because in the original you got a good few interactions with Leon and Claire, like either in face-to-face or by radio, which made them feel like they were partners and friends. I won't go into the continuities here if you want to experience the story, but the only way you can get a full grip on the story is if you take bits of each story and make a consistent story in your head, which you shouldn't need to do, but hey, what can you do? The game does have a few things to give each scenario a different feeling, like different weapons, slightly remixed puzzles, different locations, and slightly different scenes, like who gets to meet Marvin in the beginning as previously mentioned. This helps a bit, but I wish we got more. This issue didn't really bother me at first, as when I played this game for the first time, I didn't have much knowledge of the original game, so I kinda just ignored it. It doesn't ruin my enjoyment, but I still think it's an issue that needs to be acknowledged when Capcom was making more Resident Evil games with scenarios in mind. With all that said, Resident Evil 2 Remake is a phenomenal game, and Capcom deserves all the praise. If you ignore the problem with scenarios, you have a very atmospheric and scary survival horror game, with fun characters, engaging gameplay, and an interesting story. What's not to love? Resident Evil 2 Remake gets a 9 out of 10. No, screw it, it's getting a 9.5 out of 10. Same with the original game. Both games are great for different reasons and are on par with one another. Both games are getting a 9.5 out of 10. Capcom now had 2 major successes back to back. Can Capcom keep the streak going? Well, for their next title, they decided to finish off the original trilogy by remaking Resident Evil 3. It seemed like an obvious decision with Ori 2 Remake being such a huge success. Now, without further ado, let's get into Resident Evil 3 Remake. Resident Evil 3 Remake mostly retells RE3's events while making a few changes to the plot. It still follows Jill trying to escape from Raccoon City while escaping the unstoppable nemesis, you know, same beats. But Jill in this game is the best she has ever been since her original adventure in Resident Evil 3. I'm not joking. Sure, she was good in other games she appeared in, but here she just comes in full swing, and she doesn't miss the mark. Nicole Tompkins, the voice actress, breathes new life into this character and does justice to the past iterations. Jill is extremely charismatic. She is funny, but if she's pissed, she switches from lovable hero to the goddamn predator. She is not to be trifled with. She doesn't have much character growth besides for, you know, overcoming nemesis and escaping, but that's furthering the plot, not really personal. We do get flashes of Jill's mental state in the game, as she's clearly suffering from PTSD from the events of Resident Evil 1, as she is shown to have nightmares and she takes a lot of medication. I like this little detail and I wish it got expanded upon. The only other growth she gets is her trusting the members of the UBCS, mainly our second protagonist, Carlos. Carlos is a million times better here than his original self. I didn't find Carlos that memorable in the original, so I was really surprised by how much I loved his character here. He is always entertaining to watch, and his chemistry with Jill is brilliant. He has a nice little character arc, and it is a welcome element to add into the narrative. Side characters are really good here too. Mikhail is the older, more experienced member of the group, and the way he talks just makes me hold on to his every word. He always has something interesting to say. Tyrell is Carlos's buddy, and he was a nice companion for him. He didn't have much character, but he was a fun sidekick to tag along on the adventure. Nikolai is still a dick in this game, like in the original, but he's a dick in that entertaining sort of way. You'll just love to hate him. I find some of his lines so quotable, I love it. Cast is all around good. When it comes to gameplay, it's very similar to Resident Evil 2 Remake. Almost a carbon copy, which isn't really a bad thing here because that game's gameplay was really solid. It's still a third-person over-the-shoulder horror game with actually way more action than the last two games, same as the original. Shooting is pretty much the same. It's still so satisfying to pull off a headshot. Puzzles return, but they are very mediocre. None of them are really that interesting. We only get a few here. They either involve you finding a room with a basic puzzle and then solving it in that same room in like a minute, or you get slightly better ones that involve you searching for an item, which makes you explore the beautiful environments that this game has, or take on cool enemies. If you're looking for deep and complex puzzles, this game would not deliver.
A new feature that was added in was the dodge move. Well, it was there in the original, but it's back again now in the remake.
In the remake, it's honestly a nice feature. It's hard to get the timing down right, but you'll eventually get the hang of it. If you successfully perform a dodge, you can aim and shoot enemies' weakest points, which is an awesome reward for mastering the ability.
It is a great ability to have, but the biggest problem I have with it is that for certain parts of the game, many of the boss fights, you have to rely on the dodge. Like, you cannot win these boss fights if you haven't learned the dodge yet. Which is in stark contrast to the original. Like, it was handy to know the dodge in RE3 original, but it wasn't necessary. You could still play through the game without it. But here, if you don't know, you're screwed.
Another new feature that was added in is an option where if you get grabbed, you can tap or hold the A button to minimize the damage you take when an enemy grabs you. This is fine, but I wish we had the defense feature back. They removed it here. I'm guessing this was done because you now have a dodge feature, so they didn't want you to be untouchable. So overall, the gameplay is the same as Resident Evil 2, besides for a few changes. You're still going to fight zombies, solve very basic puzzles, and fight bosses. You still play as Jill here, but you also play as Carlos in a few sections. He doesn't have a separate campaign like Leon or Claire would. His story and Jill's are intertwined together, which I don't mind honestly. It's a bit unique. Carlos doesn't have a dodge, but instead a sick punch. Really fun to pull off. His sections feel more action than horror, as you get way more enemies with him, and he is armed with an assault rifle, and the devs want to make sure you use said assault rifle. Carlos even gets a defend your position sequence ripped straight off RE4. Now that I think about it, pretty much every game after 4, besides Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake, followed this trend. I don't have a problem with it, just something I noticed. Now I can't forget the main villain Nemesis. How is he? I bet he's 100 times more scary than Mr. X. Yeah, honestly, Nemesis is alright. I'm maybe a bit disappointed here, but it's true in my opinion. First, let me talk about the positive things done with him. The design of Nemesis is fantastic. This is a great update to his original design. Major props here. I love the voice. And the theme that plays when Nemesis appears is awesome. When you encounter him, he's really fast and he has way more moves than X. Nemesis can swipe at you with his tentacles, grab you, punch you, and he gets weapons later on, which definitely ups the ante. I like how he morphs into more monstrous designs the more you defeat him. It's like the Terminator. When you think it's dead, it really isn't. Now all of this sounds really great, and they are, but the problems are what really bog him down. The biggest problem with Nemesis is that he's not very unpredictable, besides for one gameplay section. Most of your time spent with him is in scripted events or boss fights, which are fun, but the scripted bits get old during repeat playthroughs. It's criminal that we didn't get more gameplay of him just randomly showing up in places to ruin your day. His bosses range from okay to good. His fights get worse as they go on. The first two are fine, but one of them is just a repeat with one new move, and the final boss fight is easy on normal, but ridiculously hard on anything above hardcore difficulty. It's beyond broken. Sometimes in the bosses, his hitbox will be broken too. You could be well out of his reach, but nope, he got ya. Sucks to be you. Nemesis here is like Mr. X in the original Resident Evil 2. Mr. X only appeared in scripted sections most of the time, with him appearing randomly on occasion. Now the Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake is basically the better Nemesis, because he's always stalking you while having these few scripted bits. So unfortunately, Nemesis is a severe downgrade. When it comes to other enemies you face, they're good. Probably not as good as Resident Evil 2 Remake, but good nonetheless. Zombies are still intimidating, but the gore for them is slightly downgraded. In Ori 2 Remake, you could tear a zombie apart limb from limb, and they could still be alive trying to gnaw at you with no body parts. Body parts could sloppily fall apart in a sick and gory way, but in Resident Evil 3, they just explode. Don't know what happened there. Weird downgrade. Other enemies are good too. My personal favourite being the Hunter Gamma and the Hunter Betas. The Gammas have very creepy design. Although they just creepily walk towards you, it only has one move, which is a one-hit kill, so it adds tension when they appear. The Betas are way more quick and have a wide array of deadly attacks, including a one-hit kill move, which makes encounters with them very tense. The enemy roster was solid and fun to fight against, unlike the main boss for f***'s sake. Another major flaw with this game is the length. The game can be beat in 5 to 6 hours, maybe 7 or 8 if you're a novice Ori player. It's too short, and it's because of the cut content. There are areas, gameplay features, and cutscenes that were present in the original, but are not here. I didn't have a problem with this initially, as I didn't have much knowledge of the original Resident Evil 3 when I bought the remake, but when I look back, it's a bit ridiculous. Mercenaries is missing, the choice feature is gone, and the multiple endings are missing too. It's always the same ending. When you do get to the ending, you're presented with a shop. This sort of saves the game a bit in terms of replayability. When you complete the game or complete certain goals, you gain points that you can spend on cosmetics, guns, or upgrades. This adds more fun to the gameplay, and the more powerful weapons make it fun to speedrun. The game's length should not be this short, but it does help speedrunning, so I guess there's the silver lining. You also get concept art and models to look at, which are nice, but nothing to write home about. You unlock more difficulties too, which change certain gameplay bits, but it can't fix the problems present.
In this portion of the review, I was going to review the multiplayer mode, Ori Resistance or Resident Evil Resistance, whatever. But looking back, I'm not gonna put this part in. It's a okay multiplayer. It's kind of gameplay's fine, but it gets repetitive after a while. I had a lot of issues joining games, and it was just not great. I think the multiplayer is dead now because I could barely find games back when it launched, and this is over a year since I last played it, so it's probably dead now. Yeah, but I just don't care. So if you're gonna buy this game, get it for the single player. Don't care about the multiplayer. But yeah, it's not good. So that would be this part of the review done with.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Resident Evil 3 Remake is a bit of a mess. It has some major issues and an okay multiplayer mode, but it has great gameplay, characters, and beautiful looking environments. I also forgot to mention, but the soundtrack is good here too. I'd recommend a listen. This game could have been better than Resident Evil 2 Remake or the original Resident Evil 3, but its major flaws stop it from achieving its full potential.
Ori 3 Remake gets a 6 out of 10. While Capcom were revisiting the past with Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 Remake, fans were curious as to what the next mainline entry was going to be. Resident Evil 7's ending left so many doors open as to where to take the series next. Would they continue with a first-person perspective, or copy over the remake's third-person style? Would we follow Ethan Winters again, or a new protagonist? And there's now a blue umbrella? Fans wanted answers, and in May 2021 we got Resident Evil Village. After some questionable marketing, let's finish off this series review once and for all. Resident Evil Village starts off with Resident Evil 7 protagonist Ethan Winters with his wife Mia. Yes, the canon ending of Resident Evil 7 is choosing Mia. You are an absolute buffoon if you chose Zoe. And he is with his baby daughter, Rose. Without spoiling too much, Chris Redfield barges in and takes Rose and knocks out Ethan. Ethan wakes up to a few of Chris's men dead and Rose missing. He stumbles across a village and is attacked by werewolf-type creatures. He has to defend himself against hordes of them with slim chance of survival until a bell rings and the creatures retreat. Sounds familiar. Now Ethan has to go through hell once again, not to save his wife, but now his kid. I'm going to quickly talk about the story, but not any spoilers since this game is still pretty new. It only came out less than a year ago. The story is pretty good. The setup is great at teasing us and making us want to solve the mystery of what's going on, but the intro of the game feels very repetitive on repeat playthroughs. You have to play through the bit of the house and the walk through the woods to the village every time you play through it, which takes about 30 minutes, and the game doesn't really properly start in terms of gameplay until after the initial attack by the werewolves. They're called Lycans, by the way. That section is pretty scripted because if you don't follow a set path, you will die a lot. Trust me, I did die a lot, I have the footage to prove it. Anyways, I'm turning off. Back to the story. The story itself, when it gets going, is pretty basic like Resident Evil 7, but it gets the job done, even though it requires certain characters to act a bit stupid to get the plot moving. It's just get Rose back, which sounds like a pretty self-contained story, but near the end we get connections to the bigger Resident Evil universe, same as Resident Evil 7. The story does have a few interesting twists and turns to keep players interested. I recommend at least watching a video on Resident Evil 7 story before playing this though, as you don't want to get confused, this is a direct sequel after all. What saves the story is the characters. Let's start with Ethan Winters. This man has had a huge upgrade from Resident Evil 7. I couldn't give a shit about him there. He was really basic and was there to be a vessel for the player. Here he actually feels like a proper character. His characterization isn't amazing, but I actually cared for him, and oh boy, that ending. If you know, you know. I got to say though, he does ask a lot of questions.
Rose? What the hell are you doing with my daughter? Where the hell am I? What the hell? What the hell is going on here? Wait! The fuck is wrong with you?
I know he's confused about the whole thing, but you could play a drinking game with all the times he says the phrase, what the hell. Chris is good here, but I don't like how he is written in the first half, because they make him almost serious for no reason other than he would spoil plot points too early. I hate when characters act out of character for the sake of plot. Just rewrite it in a different way to avoid it. Characters even acknowledge this, but Chris just shrugs it off. Capcom, just because you acknowledge bad writing does not make it better. Also, it's a bit jarring hearing Chris's voice actor talk, since it's the same guy who did Carlos from Resident Evil 3 Remake. I don't mind, it's just something I had to get used to. Something I did mind though a bit though was his swearing. I know, just seeing Chris swear a lot isn't something I'm used to. I just think he's just a big Boy Scout, but hey. The rest of the good guy characters are They aren't terrible, but most of them die before they can leave an impact, and some die in more stupid ways than others. The villains are the main stars here. Here we have Mother Miranda and her 4 lords, Lady Dimitrescu, Heisenberg, Donna Beneviento, and Moreau. These guys are a colourful bunch to say the least. They all have distinctive personalities that stand out and make them memorable, especially Lady D for her wonderful personalities. Each lord has their own section of the village to themselves, and you have to fight through all of them to reach Mother Miranda, who unfortunately is the worst one of this colourful bunch. She isn't bad, but she gets very little screen time. Her motivations are simple to understand, but when you think about it, it could have been solved in a less violent way. But I guess the excuse is that the virus of the game has corrupted her, or a more simple excuse is that we wouldn't have a game if she didn't act the way she did. It's a shame that I didn't care much for her, as the plot reveals that she is one of the most important characters in the series, but I just didn't give a crap about her. Thankfully the lords make up for her shortcomings. Starting with Lady D. She owns this huge castle with her 3 daughters who serve as mini-bosses while you're there. Lady D has a great commanding presence, and I love her very posh way of acting and talking. She is shown to be a caring mother in her own sick and twisted way, which makes it all the more satisfying when you pick off her daughters one by one. The only issues I have with her is that there's a few times where she has Ethan dead to rights, but she lets him go, which makes her lose a bit of her fear factor when you encounter her. And my other issue is that she isn't in the game that much. Only 2 hours really, which is surprising since a lot of the marketing was around her. Problems aside, she's a great villain, maybe the best one here, and it's not because of her ballistics. The next one is Donna Beneviento. She is a shy villain who uses illusions and hallucinations to confuse her enemy. She also uses a doll named Angie to communicate with other people instead of talking to them herself. Donna probably has the most interesting backstory of the Lords, and for damn sure has the scariest section of the game. If you know, you know. Finding out how she ended up like this is very interesting and tragic, and you almost feel sorry for her. Almost. Her whole doll aesthetic is very memorable, and the voice actress brings a lot of energy to the part, making Angie all cute and childish while trying to murder you. Her section is short and sweet. It's only around an hour long, but any more they might have overstayed its welcome. Next is Moreau, who is the worst one of the Lords, but he isn't as bad as Mother Miranda. He is a fish-like monster who has serious mommy issues. He's presented as a sympathetic villain, but his boss fight pissed me off so much that I actually hated him, but at least he has more going for him than Mother Miranda. Last but certainly not least is Heisenberg. No, not that one. This one. He might be my favourite. I love his voice. He kind of sounds like Nicolas Cage, and I love his kind of relaxed attitude. Well, he's relaxed until someone like Lady D starts pissing him off. I love how he can go from really mad to chill in an instant.
Shut your fucking hole! Sorry about that.
He's the only one to have beef with Mother Miranda and has different motivations compared to the other Lords who just want to please her. He's a bit over the top, but at least a hilarious moment. He is the most well-rounded villain of the bunch, and as such, he's my favourite. Resident Evil 8 plays very similar to Resident Evil 7. Back to a first-person perspective again. I like that Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8 are in a first-person perspective, as it gives the games a distinct identity. The only problem I have with the camera is that the field of view is a bit small. It's hard to gather your bearings when you're in the middle of a fight, and I think that the movement speed and turning is a bit slow. But that could be fixed in settings, I wouldn't know, I didn't check. Gunplay is almost identical to Resident Evil 7. Guns still sound satisfying to fire, but some guns feel a bit underpowered though. The guns sound great, but the enemies sometimes don't react to the shots in a satisfying way. For example, the first shotgun you get barely staggers enemies. If you're lucky it might work, but look at the RE4 shotgun. You feel the power there, and that's the first one. That's the first shotgun you get in the game. It doesn't help that the gore is inconsistent. In Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 Remake, and Resident Evil 3 Remake, enemies will lose limbs and get their heads blown off, but only some enemies will lose their heads, while others just fall over when killed. It's a major downgrade. Weapon variety is good though. We get pistols, we get shotguns, snipers, machine guns, grenade launchers, pipe bombs, landmines, and after you complete the game, you unlock an in-game shop where you can buy weapons, including a lightsaber. Combat here is pretty action-packed. It's in the same vein as RE4 where it's a mix of action and horror instead of Resident Evil 7 where it was just mostly horror. You get plenty of ammo here too, as enemies drop items like Resident Evil 4. Some of these items are crafting items which are used to create different types of ammo and explosives. It's an upgrade to the crafting system in Resident Evil 7. I never ran out of ammo here, unlike Resident Evil 7 where I was constantly running out of ammo. Resident Evil Village has its own version of the merchant called the Duke. I was a bit skeptical of the Duke because I was scared that his character was just going to be a compilation of fat jokes, but thankfully he's genuinely charming and charismatic like the Resident Evil 4 merchant. I think I still prefer the original merchant, but I like this one. He has a lot of fun dialogue, but I wish you could skip his dialogue when buying stuff. In Resident Evil 4, you could skip the merchant's dialogue if you just want to quickly check something while you were there. But here you have to listen to everything he says, which can be annoying on repeat playthroughs. What the Duke actually does though when playing is sell you weapons, ammo, which you couldn't do in RE4, health items and upgrades. You can also cook meals from animals you hunt in the environment. These meals give you stat buffs like increased health, take less damage when guarding, etc. You can also sell treasures you can find in the environment and from bosses. He actually has a bit of a stake in the plot as well, like he isn't in the game much, but he actually somewhat affects the story, which is different from the Resident Evil 4 merchant who's completely absent from the game. Like he only is there to sell you stuff, he doesn't affect the game at all, in terms of story anyway. Gameplay is all over the place. What I mean is that there's so many different sections with different ideas and themes. Some places are done better than others. Lady D's castle is without doubt the highlight of the game. The gameplay feels like RE1 where you walk around a mansion-like area solving cryptic puzzles, killing zombies and fighting bosses in any random room. Lady D is like Mr. X's nemesis as she follows you around the castle and is invincible until her boss fight. I wish that Lady D's daughters had better boss fights. They're just slightly stronger enemies than the standard ones. You don't change your tactics with them really, it's the same as a normal enemy. I wish they got more screen time. They all get killed before they can make a strong impression. All their scenes in the marketing is like half their overall screen time. I also wish that the puzzles were more complicated. They were a bit simple besides for maybe like one or two. But I can say that Lady D's boss fight is great. It's big and epic. It almost feels like Dark Souls. You have to maneuver around and avoid her attacks while trying to make accurate shots to stun her, which can be hard when she's flying around the place. Overall, a solid boss fight and a solid area of the game. Donna Beneviento's house is very linear and strictly puzzle-based, which I gladly welcomed. The puzzles here are good, and the horror that is shown here is top-notch. I was unsettled as to what I saw, and it's the only part of the game where I questioned whether or not I should continue. I wish that the horror carried over to other areas of the game. Resident Evil 7 had a pretty consistent sense of horror throughout the game, while here it's only really in this one section. Also, Donna's boss fight is very short and simple as it's just a twisted game of hide and seek, which is good for the first time playing through, but I sound like a broken record when I'm saying this, but it gets repetitive on a repeat playthrough, as she hides in the same place every time. Overall, it's a well-designed linear section. Moreau's Reservoir is next, and he is not only the worst lord, but also has the worst section. Okay, it's not that bad. It's basically an obstacle course where you avoid Big Fish Moreau, solve puzzles, and fight him at the end. The course is fine, but it's a bit boring, especially when, once again, you're playing the game on a repeat playthrough. His boss fight is terrible too, as he's a huge bullet sponge, and some of his attacks have broken hit detection. You could be safe in cover and he'll still hit you. I spent hours trying to defeat him on the house difficulty, and I had a decent amount of ammo saved up, but I had to buy an infinite weapon to beat it, and even with an infinite weapon, it still took a lot of time. This boss fight. It's up there with the Bat boss fight in Resident Evil 0, the Tyrant from Revelations 1, and the final Nemesis fight in Resident Evil 3 Remake. These are by far the worst boss fights in the series, in my opinion. The hardest difficulty in this game is broken as hell. I do not like it. It's clearly meant for when you're doing New Game Plus or something, because there are some parts of this game that are like literally impossible if you don't have something from the in-game shop. You cannot go in on the first run. The last major section before the finale is Heisenberg's Fortress and Factory. These sections are the most action-filled out of all the lords, which isn't a bad thing here as the level design is really well done and the combat is still engaging even at this point since you would have a big arsenal of weapons by now, so taking on large amounts of enemies feels like a natural regression of your character through gameplay. The enemies get armoured up now, which changes up things a little as you can't rely on conventional means of disposing of them. When I first played this, I avoided most of the big ones to save ammo. The fortress is strictly linear while the factory is a bit more open. It's not as open as Lady D's castle, but it's more open than Moreau and Donna's areas. I love the body horror type imagery we get here. It's creepy and it makes for fun and intense sections of gameplay. Puzzles were pretty tame and easy to complete. Heisenberg's boss fight was awesome though. It's really over the top and it's almost like Transformers, but I had a blast with it. Heisenberg's section overall is really good, but I can see some people not liking it because the pacing slows down a bit here and they might not be a fan of the robotic type enemies. I can look past it, but it's something to point out. The village itself connects all lords together. You return here every so often with new objectives and as such you unlock more of the village to see. The village visually changes throughout the game too, which I love. It gives you a sense of progression. It's pretty tame compared to the other areas, but it's a nice place to calm down and plan your next move. Well, don't get too comfortable, there are still enemies about. I kind of wish though that you could go to any of the lords in any order you wanted, because in every time you play the game you always go Lady D, Donna, Moreau, and Heisenberg. You can never go in a different order. I feel like for replay value they should have allowed you to go in any order you want. Soundtrack is really good here. I really dig the atmospheric tracks we get here, especially the stuff in Lady D's castle. Her castle pretty much has the best stuff in the game if you couldn't tell. The save room theme is really well done, but it's hard to hear and it doesn't play immediately when you enter the save room. I had to look it up on YouTube to properly hear it for God's sakes. Ori has a lot of variety in its gameplay, but a lot of that variety is taken from other games like Resident Evil 4, 7 and 1, and it does her stuff well but doesn't exceed those games, and sometimes it does even worse, which is not a great sign. It has Resident Evil 4's action, but doesn't have the consistent good feedback from shooting. It has some horror from Resident Evil 7, but that game went all the way with its horror, and I still find it scary to play even now. It takes Resident Evil 1's atmosphere, well at least with the castle, and to be fair, it does come very close to matching it in that section, so I'll give it that. It does other things though with Moreau and Heisenberg, but those ideas aren't fully fleshed out as Capcom worked on so much other stuff and ideas that it's almost like they forgot to fully polish certain bits. This reminds me, the inventory system is the same as Ori 4 with the Tetris style attaché case, but even that wasn't fully fleshed out as you can't properly rotate items and it's pretty pointless as I never needed to manage my inventory. Well, I need to like twice, but that's because I bought like a big new gun. I think the best way to describe Capcom's execution of their vision here is jack of all trades, master of none. This lack of commitment to fully complete ideas leaves the experience getting lukewarm in places and leaves Capcom's vision of the game looking blurry. I don't want to sound all negative, I did enjoy the campaign. I love Lady D's castle, that's the only part I loved. I liked Heisenberg and Donna's sections, but Moreau's section was and the finale was a bit all over the place. It turns into Call of Duty. My feelings for the game are all over the place. The final boss fight with Miranda isn't that great here. It's alright, but I didn't love it. The game does come in a mercenaries mode, which is very similar to Resident Evil 4, 5 and 6, but the map design for this feels very linear, as certain enemies only appear if you travel to certain parts of the map. It's not bad, as it's a good way to memorize locations for when you're getting high scores. High scores unlock bonuses in the shop, like infinite weapons and the aforementioned lightsaber. I enjoyed Resident Evil Village, I really did, but this game feels unfocused. I wish that Capcom put more focus on specific parts of the game more than others, or at the very least delayed the game to sort these issues out. It can't be that harsh as it was made during the pandemic, but I still have to note it down regardless. I'm still excited for future content in this universe, so at least it didn't make me lose interest in this franchise. Resident Evil Village gets a 7.5 out of 10. Well, here we are at the very end. This video has been in the making for so long. I started back when like Resident Evil 3, and it's been an off again, on again project for me. There's times where I just wanted to give up and stop, but I wanted to really express my opinions on this series that I really do love, no matter how tedious the editing process got. Despite how long it took, I'd love to do more videos like this in the future. Probably won't be as long as this video, but I'd like to do more reviews down the line. Probably not series reviews unless the series is not that long. But yeah, I'd like to do more of these down the line sometime. I will try to upload more often and not take nearly 2 years. I'll try and do like reviews and other gameplay stuff I usually do. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a comment and any constructive criticism would be appreciated. I want to improve my work with these types of edits. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you once again for watching. I'll see you all later.